I'm sure you've said a million times today in one story, I'm afraid. But we're also going to be talking about Rachel Reeves' U-turn. Didn't take long, did it, from the budget, which is only 8 or 9 weeks away ago.
Has she gone from zero to hero over net zero?
Yes, effectively.
In a curious way.
Well, no, not this is more about non-doms.
Oh, the non-doms.
So this is her saying that actually, well, she hasn't. I'm paraphrasing. Maybe I've made a mistake discouraging wealth creators from Britain when I actually want to push growth.
Yeah, and non-doms do pay tax, by the way.
Of course they do.
Yes.
On all their UK activities. Yeah. Which I don't think she fully understood.
No, I don't think so. And all those foreigners over here, they pay tax here too. So there you go. Yeah. Russell's here on the other side of the news at 4 o'clock, right here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk, this is Drive, and we are going to go straight to Liverpool Crown Court now, where Judge Goose is starting the sentencing of Axel Rudakubana. I'll be back in a sec.
15 minutes, he savagely killed 3 of them and attempted to kill 8 more, as well as 2 adults who tried to stop him. It was of such extreme violence, of the utmost and exceptionally high seriousness, that it is difficult to comprehend why it was done. I am sure that Rudakubana had a settled and determined intention to carry out these offences, and that had he been able to, he would have killed each and every child, all 26 of them, as well as any adults who got in his way. It was only because some managed to escape that prevented many more from being murdered. I am also sure that after the other children, 8 of whom he had very seriously injured, managed to escape, it left him in the upstairs room and landing, where he returned to continue his sustained and brutal violence against 2 of the youngest of those children, stabbing them multiple times. That demonstrated how determined he was to cause the maximum suffering he could. Left alone with them where they'd fallen, he continued shocking and extreme violence. Many who have heard the evidence summarised by the prosecution in this hearing, and having seen the CCTV recordings played with a view from the outside of the building, might describe what he did as evil. Who could dispute it? But on any view, it was at least the most extreme, shocking and exceptionally serious crime. In describing the injuries caused to each of the victims, I will summarise the evidence, being conscious that the families of Elsie Stankham, B.B. King and Alice De Silva Aguiar are in court, as are the families of each of the other victims. It's necessary, however, in sentencing, briefly to refer to the injuries. Elsie Stankham was aged only 7 when Rudakabana inflicted at least 85 sharp force injuries to her head, face, neck, torso and upper limbs. Severe force was used to cause her death. B.B. King was aged only 6 when he inflicted at least 122 sharp force injuries to her head, face, neck, torso and upper limbs. It was the opinion of Dr. Seeker, the pathologist, that Rudakabana had tried to decapitate her. He concluded that severe force was used to kill her. Alice De Silva Aguiar.
So just a reminder, this is Talk. I'm Russell Quirk. You're listening to Live the sentencing of Axel Rudakabana by Judge Goose in Liverpool Crown Court. And just to warn you that you will potentially hear some rather graphic content. But we are streaming this live from the court on Talk right now. And of course, I and others, we will be back. In fact, the cameras have just gone off, which is probably because of said sensitive content. So we'll be back to that live feed as soon as we get it. We've got Peter Blexley, of course, who I think is on the line now, actually. He's ready to talk to us. So, Peter, if you can just forgive me, you'll come back in and out, I suspect, as we need to go back to the court for this sentencing. On this day of days, I have to say, I never thought when I lobbied talkTV bosses to do this job that I would be sitting here doing this, frankly, and listening to and just trying to kind of process, I suppose, what has happened here in terms of the disgusting, horrific, ugly, evil crimes of Axel Rudakabana. And of course, look, we don't know exactly what the sentence is going to be yet, but Judge Goose is laying it out and really extolling the severity of what this monster did. I presume, Peter, you're watching it?
Yes, I am, and I've been following the trial all day as various witnesses, victims of Rudakabana, those who survived, have given their victim statements, speaking of the enduring trauma that so many of them are suffering. And of course, it is that huge sense of enduring loss that these families will feel forever, those who had their beautiful children so wickedly taken from them.
Well, and Peter, let's just talk about those children, because look, I hate saying Rudakabana's name, frankly, but we should talk about the young girls that lost their lives. B.B. King, who was 6, Elsie Stankham, who was 7, and Alice De Silva Aguiar, who was 9. We should keep their names and their memories very, very much in mind, I think. But at the same time, I think that we're looking at, when it comes to this horrific, this evil monster, this disgusting individual. I don't want to sensationalise this, but I think from what we've heard today in particular, some of which we can't broadcast in terms of the graphic nature of the injuries to those poor girls, those poor victims, this individual has got to be up there with Ian Huntley, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, the Moors killers, hasn't he?
It is utterly brutal what he did. As the judge said just before the cameras went off in court, over 80 injuries on one of these darling little girls and over 120 injuries on another one. It was just monstrous. It is beyond the reasoning of any decent human being. It is almost
Peter, can just hold it there, mate. So I did say that we're going to have to do this a bit. Let's just go back to the courtroom, can we? While Judge Goose continues his sentencing narrative.
He went out to see what had happened and was attacked with a knife. Rudakabana stabbed him in the leg, causing a deep wound as he tried to kill him. He was only saved when another witness appeared. I have read each of the victim's personal statements, and they are all deeply moving. The harm that Rudakabana has caused to each family, each child, and to the community has been profound and permanent. For the families of Elsie, Bibi and Alice, they will never recover from what happened to their daughter. For those children and the adults that he attempted to murder, their lives will never be the same, nor will their families who are left to look after their exceptionally brave daughters. Also for the emergency services whose personnel had to deal with the aftermath. In just under 15 minutes, Rudakabana murdered 3 children, attempted to murder 8 other children, and also 2 adults. He was prevented from murdering more only by the escape of the other children. When the police arrived at about 12 noon, they found him standing over the body of B.B. King and still holding the knife. It was B.B. who had suffered at least 122 separate knife wounds. He was arrested, taken into custody, and whilst Rudakabana did not say anything in his police interviews, he did make unsolicited comments which are deeply disturbing, including, quote, "I'm glad to see those kids are dead. It makes me happy," close quote, and, quote, "It's a good thing those children are dead," close quote. In his home, the police discovered clear evidence of a settled intention to carry out mass killing. On one of his computers were files proving that he had a long-standing preoccupation with violent killing and genocide. Of particular significance were copies of an Al-Qaeda training manual, which described methods of killing with a knife and where to attack the victim. Part of it referred to attacking the head and neck, just as he had done to some of the victims in this case. Also, the manual provided instruction on how to produce ricin, a highly dangerous toxin, which can cause multiple deaths and has no known antidote. I am sure that he had followed those instructions because the police found in his bedroom the materials to produce ricin and a pulp residue within a container. That was examined by an expert in chemical and biological warfare agents, Dr. Martin Pierce, and confirmed it was ricin pulp and castor oil. His opinion was that there was sufficient ricin pulp that with some further purification process it would have provided a range of up to 1,269 doses, which would cause death if inhaled. However, there was no evidence that Rudakabana had recently tried purification. I am satisfied that for some time he had planned to kill as many people as he could, as the prosecution have called it, quotes, a mass killing. He bought the knife he wanted to use, which had a particularly sharp point. He had read information on how to stab people with greatest effect to kill them. He saw the publicity for a children's party in Southport at the Heart Space Dance Studio and decided to kill as many as he could, targeting very young children. I'm also satisfied that if he hadn't decided that way of killing, in time he was highly likely to use the ricin he had produced. The prosecution have made it clear that these proceedings were not acts of terrorism within the meaning of the terrorism legislation, because there is no evidence that Rudakabana's purpose was to advance political, religious, racial or ideological cause. I must accept that conclusion. However, in my judgment, his culpability for this extreme level of violence is equivalent in its seriousness to terrorist murders, whatever his purpose. Whether his motivation was for terrorism or not misses the point. What he did on the 29th of July last year has caused such shock and revulsion to the whole nation that it must be viewed as being at the very extreme level of crime. His culpability and the harm he caused and intended were at the highest. I do not, however, take into account against him what happened in different parts of the country after his arrest. He did not cause that. Axel Rudikabana was born in Cardiff on the 7th of August of 2006. He's a UK citizen, now aged 18, but was still 17 when he committed these offences. He was only 9 days short of his 18th birthday, which has a particular significance. Had he been 18, I make it clear that I would have been compelled to impose on him life imprisonment without a minimum term, otherwise known as a whole life term, meaning that he would never be released. However, the law does not permit such a sentence for those offenders who are under 18 when they offend. Rudikabana has only one previous conviction, on the 19th of February 2020, when he was aged 13, for possession of a knife on school premises, assault and possession of an offensive weapon in a public place. He was made subject to a juvenile referral order. Those offences took place when he returned to the school from which he'd been excluded due to his previous behaviour. He entered the school without permission, carrying a knife and hockey stick, intent on attacking another pupil, whom he said had bullied him. For the offence of murder on counts 1, 2 and 3, the sentence must be custody for life. I am required to fix the minimum term which he must serve in custody before he may apply to the parole board for his release. It will be for the board to decide if he is ever safe to be released into the community, and if ever he is, he will remain on licence for the rest of his life, subject to recall into custody if he breaches his licence terms. The minimum term I will fix will be a very substantial one, and the very least he will be detained, which will mean that he will serve almost the whole of his life in custody. I consider at this time that it is likely he will never be released, and that he will be in custody for all his life. The starting point in deciding the minimum term in custody on counts 1 to 3 must be 27 years, because he was 17 years old when he murdered Elsie, Bibi and Alice. I find the following circumstances make those murders yet more serious. Firstly, there are two exceptionally high factors that would, but for his age, require me to impose a whole life term. The murder of 2 or more persons where each murder involved a substantial degree of premeditation or planning, and it was in each case the murder of a child with such premeditation or planning. Secondly, the children were particularly vulnerable because of their very young age, being 7, 6 and 9 respectively. Thirdly, the physical suffering that he caused as he repeatedly stabbed them. Fourthly, there were 3 murders. Fifthly, at the time he carried out these murders, he also attempted to kill 10 more, 8 of whom were also very young children. Sixthly, the severity of the injuries caused to the victims. Seventhly, he produced highly toxic poison ricin, which he was very likely to use at some time had he not committed these offences. In mitigation for this offending, Rudikabana is still only 18 years old. However, I consider that his age has already provided him with a substantial reduction in his sentence, because it means that he has avoided a whole life term. Whilst he has entered guilty pleas, saving the families and victims the pain of a trial, he cannot claim to have shown any remorse. His unsolicited comments in the police station made clear his feelings. However, lack of remorse is not an aggravating factor. I have read evidence within a statement of an assistant head teacher which describes how Rudikabana's early years at school developed from a normal student to one who became increasingly threatening to those he felt had wronged him, leading to his exclusion. None of this gives any indication of what he was to do on the 29th of July last year. I have read the intermediary assessment report dated the 24th of September 2024, in which its author said that he presented as having high-functioning autism and that he does not have any associated learning disabilities. The report found that he had some communication and attention difficulties. None of this offered any explanation for this offending. No further expert evidence has been provided on his behalf. I've taken into account the overarching principles sentencing children and young people. The fact that he's now 18 years old does not make the guideline irrelevant. However, I'm not persuaded that his emotional age is different to his chronological age. I will give him the appropriate discount to reflect the fact that whilst almost 18, he was still young. In sentencing, I will impose concurrent sentences, meaning they will all be served at the same time. However, I will treat the murder offences in counts 1 to 3 as the lead offences and take into account all of the total offending when fixing the minimum term of custody he must serve. Also, I have in mind the totality of the sentences, requiring me to take a step back and consider whether they are just and proportionate, and I conclude that they are. The guilty pleas will allow some small discount on the sentence because they were entered so late, on the first day of the trial. I turn to the attempted murder offences in counts 4 to 13. Each of these offences requires me to impose concurrent sentences of custody for life under Section 272 of the Sentencing Act 2020. Each offence is within Schedule 19 of the Act. I am satisfied in the circumstances of these offences that Rudy Cabana is a dangerous offender and that the circumstances justify the imposition of a life sentence. I must then fix the custodial term which he must serve. For each of the offences where he attempted to murder a child, being counts 4 to 11, the appropriate sentence guideline is Category A2 with a starting point for sentence of 30 years and a range up to 35 years. The very young age of each victim and the substantial planning by him requires me to increase that sentence to the top of the range before reducing it to reflect his age, his late guilty plea, and to reach the minimum term for these offences. Accordingly, I firstly reduced the sentence to 30 years for his age and 27 years for the guilty plea, leading to a minimum term of 18 years on each of counts 4 to 11 concurrently. On counts 12 and 13, which are attempted murder of the adults, Leanne Lucas and Jonathan Hayes, the guideline category is B2 with a starting point of 25 years and a range up to 30 years. With the same aggravating factors of seriousness and mitigation for counts 4 to 11, I increased the sentence to 30 years before reducing it to 27 years for age and to 24 years for guilty plea, leading to a minimum term on those two counts of 16 years concurrently. I now turn to the remaining counts. On count 14, having an article with a blade, the sentence is 18 months custody. This is a Category 1A offence for which I have reduced the sentence to reflect his age and plea. Count 15, production of a biological toxin. There is no offence-specific sentence guideline. I've been assisted by reference to the case of the Crown against Mohammed Ammar Ali, 2016 EWCA Crim 864, in which a sentence of 8 years imprisonment after conviction was upheld by the Court of Appeal, a decision based upon its own facts. I'm satisfied that his production in this case of ricin was more advanced and is associated with Rudy Cabana's mindset to cause many killings, whilst he had not used the ricin by the time of his arrest, taking into account his culpability and the harm risked, allowing for his age and guilty plea, I sentence him concurrently to 12 years custody. Count 16, possession of a document likely to be useful to a person preparing an act of terrorism. The sentence is 18 months custody after taking into account his age and plea and applying the guideline Category 3C. I'm now going to sentence Axel Rudy Cabana, having explained my reasons. On counts 1 to 3 murder, I sentence him to custody for life with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years, less the time he's served already. He's been in custody for 175 days on remand, which will be credited. Therefore, the minimum term is 51 years and 190 days. On counts 4 to 11, I sentence him concurrently to custody for life with a minimum term of 18 years, less 175 days served, on each count concurrently with each other. allowing for his time served on remand. The minimum term on those counts is 17 years and 190 days. On counts 12 and 13, I sentence him concurrently to custody for life with a minimum term of 16 years, less his time served on remand, on each count concurrently with each other, leading to a minimum term on those counts of 15 years and 190 days. On counts 14 and 16, I sentence him to 18 months custody concurrently with each other and all other offences. He will pay the appropriate amount he will pay the appropriate amount under 18 statutory charge, which will be entered on the court record. Accordingly, in total, I sentence Rudakabana to 13 sentences of custody for life and a minimum term to be served in custody of 51 days and 190 days. It is highly likely that he will never be released.
Okay, right, so look, we have the sentence. It looks like the total, this is complex because there are a whole range of charges ranging from 3 murders to multiple attempted murders, of course, of the other children that were at that dance class at the time, and adults, plus possession of a bladed instrument, plus the ricin charge, plus the Al-Qaeda manual charge, and so on. So a lot to unpack there. The upshot, ladies and gentlemen, is that Axel Rudakabana will serve a minimum of 51 years. Now, I have to say, some of you will be disappointed with that. That means that he effectively can be out when he is 69 years old. Of course, as the judge has just made very, very clear, that is up to the parole board. Some of us don't have a lot of faith in parole boards, but we are looking a long way off. Let's not comment on that too much, but it will be up to a parole board in 51 years' time to decide if Axel Rudakabana should be released. What's your reaction to that? What's your reaction to the sentence? What's your reaction to the fact that because of his age, he is not able to be sentenced to a whole of life term, a whole of life tariff, which means he would never come out of prison? Effectively here, he could be out at the age of 69. That's a long, long time away. My opinion on this is that if you are old enough to wield a blade and to commit the atrocities that Axel Rudakabana has, particularly actually when there's this huge debate now about voting age and when you're deemed an adult and therefore responsible. Well, if you can vote at 16 in the future, I know that's not law yet, but if you can, and you can wield a blade as this evil monster has done, then you should be sentenced as an adult. Do you agree with me? 0344 499 1000. Let's just go back to Peter as well. Sorry to keep you waiting there, Peter. What's your reaction to the sentencing?
I think His Honour Justice Goose has handed down as long a sentence as the guidelines and the legislation would allow him to do, so I commend him for that. It was 52 years minus 175 days that this monster has already served in custody. So whilst it's far from perfect, he did, of course, the judge, reiterate that it is enormously unlikely that Rudakabana will ever be freed. Although what, of course, we and generations to come need to remember is that people who are not already born yet might actually sit on Rudakabana's parole hearing if he lives for another 51 and a bit years. So people will have to be reminded of the absolute murderous reign of terror that he committed in that dance school that dreadful morning. And it must be handed down to generations that follow us. Sadly, they will have to hear his name. They will have to be familiar with his name, because it must be passed down through the generations to reiterate, to remind, to let everybody know that this monster, should he live that long, must never, ever taste freedom.
Yeah, Judge Goose, as you say, has done everything that he can. He certainly has not been liberal with the sentence at all. And when I talked about complexity just now, obviously what I am referring to is the fact that obviously there are multiple charges. There are multiple aspects to consider in terms of sentencing guidelines, the minimum, the maximum, so-called mitigation, although I think Judge Goose was having very little of that in terms of mitigation, particularly when it comes to the guilty plea really making no difference because, of course, it was so late in the day. But the upshot, yes, 51 years. But I guess my point, Pete, is that there will be people, and our switchboard is just lit up, by the way. And if you want to get involved with this, with your opinion, your two penneth, whether you agree that that was severe enough or not, 0344 499 1000, or obviously you can text us as ever, 87222 plus the word talk. I think some people would be saying, as I've just, I guess, set out, that my opinion is that the sentencing guidelines, whilst 51 years net is a long time, I think some listening to this, watching this, some, including victims' families, will have felt more reassured from a justice perspective to have heard that unequivocally Axel Rudabikana is never coming out of jail. So do the sentencing guidelines have to change, Peter?
And I put myself firmly in that category. Of course, it is scandalous and it is wrong that the judge could not impose a whole life term, but that is not the judge's fault.
No.
It is the fault of the Sentencing Act of 2020 and the Sentencing Council, who hand down sentencing guidelines in conjunction with acts of Parliament.
Yeah.
So, of course, it is wrong that he wasn't given a whole life term. The judge did the best that he could do with his hands tied behind his back. But, of course, this utter monster should be incarcerated for the rest of his life. In all likelihood, he probably will.
And Peter, can we just pause for a second? Sorry,
when you say it would be good.
Yeah, Pete, sorry to interrupt you again, but it is definitely one of those shows, I'm afraid. On the screen now, for those of you that are watching on YouTube, you will see this is CCTV footage that's now been released of the day of that atrocity in Southport. We're seeing images here from CCTV, both in the town centre, I guess as it is, but also in the taxi that Axel Rudabikana got to that Southport dance class. We're seeing him, and this is hard to watch, frankly, because not only is it him, many won't want to see an image of Axel Rudabikana on the basis of what he's done, but this, of course, is gruelling stuff, I have to say. Hard to watch because we're actually now seeing him going into the building, and then, of course, we all know what happens next. So, look, tough stuff to watch. But I guess, Peter, to your point, if we do not show some of this in 51 years' time, there won't be a record of this monster and his hideous, evil, horrendous deed for that parole board to look back on and say, I know it's been 51 years, you ain't ever coming out, mate.
And if I have grandchildren, I will tell them this cowardly monster's name, because who knows, one day they might end up sitting on the parole board and they will listen, potentially, if number one, he lives that long, and if he is granted a parole hearing. So yes, sadly, future generations are going to have to become familiar with this coward's name. And he was a coward. Look at his behaviour in court today.
Well, of course he's a coward. He went after young kids, you know. He didn't go after a rugby team, did he? He didn't go after people that could fight back. He went after innocent 6-, 7- and 9-year-olds. What a disgusting... I mean, frankly, I don't know how we ended up sharing a planet with this individual. Do you?
He is clearly an utter monster. And we now know, because Yvette Cooper has launched a public inquiry into this murderous acts by this coward. And we will hear, sadly, I feel, we may well hear that opportunities were missed and lessons have been learned.
Well, look, we need to talk about that, Peter, but I no time now, unfortunately. I suspect you will be back on this channel tomorrow, Peter Blexley, as ever, with a very insightful analysis there. As I said, the switchboard has lit up, 0344 499 1000, dozens and dozens and dozens of calls coming in. Let's go to one before we go to our next guest, who is a former criminal defence barrister, obviously, who will have a technical explanation and approach to what has just happened in terms of the sentencing of Axel Rudikabana, which obviously happened in the last 5 or 10 minutes or so. Let's go to Dean in Bridgend. Dean, what do you make of it all?
I think it's totally disgusting. And when Julia was talking about it, I had a tear in my eye for the families.
As we all have.
Yeah.
As we all have.
The thing is, what I don't understand is this, right? In Wales, where I'm from, right, you can vote at 16. So if you've got a compass mind to be able to vote at 16 and know what you're voting for, in Wales, why can't you have the full crown of the law and get done murder is murder?
So you think the sentencing guidelines need to be adjusted to take account of, I would argue any age. I mean, look at the Jamie Bolger killers.
Yeah.
What happened? They were 10 years old. And of course, they were treated very, very differently to if they had committed the same crime if they'd been 19 years old. I mean, a crime that is so serious, a crime resulting in injury, let alone death, is a crime resulting in injury or death. I don't see what difference it makes in terms of the age of the assailant. The outcome is exactly the same. So do we think, Dean, that the sentencing guidelines need to be changed pretty quickly? And maybe there'll be now, I hate to say, some jumping on the bandwagon by politicians on all sides of the parliamentary aisle to talk and to seek and insist on exactly that. Do we expect to see that in Parliament tomorrow?
No, let me say, I hope they do, right? I just want Keir Starmer to just do this right, this one thing right. He's messed up everything else. Just do this right one thing for the people of this country. Do you know what I mean?
I do, and look, we hope so, and we should be able to rely on our government and our Prime Minister to do that. They have, of course, announced an inquiry. That was announced at the beginning of the week. Are you convinced by that in terms of hoping that lessons can be learned?
No lessons are going to be learned from it. Nobody's going to go to jail for it. Nobody else is going to suffer for it, apart from the families who lost their kids. Like people at that Reach thing that he went to for terrorism, they should be accountable for it. Right?
Well, actually, Dean, I'm not. Let me stop you. And again, I totally, of all people, accept, understand, have empathy for the outrage for this individual and this instance, this event, this crime, this hideous atrocity. But of course, Prevent actually are an organisation set up specifically for those that are suspected and reported for terrorism. And of course, there is this question mark, frankly, and I'm going to talk to Helen Fields about this in a second, who's our next guest, former criminal barrister. Dean, I'm going to let you go, actually, if you don't mind, because I really need to get on, because there's so much to get through. In fact, I will just go straight to Helen, if I may, and ask this question. Helen Fields, former criminal barrister, thanks for joining me. It's going to be a bit of a fast-paced interview, I'm afraid, as I'm sure you can imagine. I take it, and I hope that you saw the sentencing as it happened just now.
Yeah, I did, yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about sentencing guidelines. Now, we're getting lots of texts in actually saying that Judge Goose has actually undertaken the task of sentencing and conducted himself, in the opinion of the people that are contacting Talk in the last 5 or 10 minutes, impeccably. He did what he needed to do, he did what he could do, and pretty much, it seems, laid down the maximum. Now, I'd like to know from you if you think that actually is true, or could he have gone further? But then we need to get onto the question of sentencing guidelines and the fact that technically Axel Rudikabana could be out in 51 years' time, which some people certainly have a big issue with, particularly our caller just then. So, yes, that first question, I guess, really. What's your view?
Yeah, well, Russell, I think the judge, Mr. Justice Goose, did a really good job, actually. I think the sentence of 52 years, the starting point of 52 years, less time served, was exactly right. I understand that your callers and all of us find it really frustrating that it's not a whole life term. I understand that completely, but at some point we have to delineate between, the age of an offender. Now, it came down from 21, now it's 18, and, one wonders how aware Rudikabana was of that, having committed this offence a matter of days before he would not have been afforded that protection under the law. But I thought the judge did a really good job. All of the sentences were exactly what I was expecting. It could even have been a little bit lower. I'm very pleased that he stuck to the highest end of this.
But was it the highest? I mean, but Helen, was it the highest, the most serious sentence that he could have laid down?
It's within his discretion, but to be quite honest with you, somebody serving 51 years plus is about the most that I would realistically expect to see. He made some comments. He talked about horrific extreme violence. He talked about this man's intention to murder as physically as he could. He talked about the, extremely high seriousness. So it's quite clear that the judge was coming at it from exactly the right standpoint and felt that he was doing all he possibly could. And I just reiterate, that's the minimum he's going to serve. And then there's going to be a parole board who will not have forgotten. They will have access to the papers. They will have access to people who are still alive then, who were affected, who will be able to go and give their views. They will know every detail of this case. It will be in the papers. And Rudy Cabana is not going anywhere until that board is convinced that he is no longer a threat, no longer a danger. They will also expect him to express things like remorse.
Which he hasn't done in any shape or form yet, far from it. He stuck two fingers up at the court and the process and the families today by playing up not once but twice. Allegations from journalists that were in the court that the reason he's sat hiding behind a so-called surgical mask was because he was smirking. We heard that actually on Talk on the Jeremy Kyle show a couple of days ago. So, I mean, yes, the question of remorse is certainly not one that is in question. He is absolutely showing none whatsoever.
No, not at all. And I think the judge could see that. I mean, it was clear from some of the evidence that was given by the prosecution about Rudy Cabana's behaviour as soon as he was arrested and the things he said that frankly don't bear repeating again about the deaths of those little girls. And it's quite clear that there was no remorse shown at the time of arrest, no remorse shown 6 months later. He's been as disruptive as he possibly could today. Nobody feels the slightest bit of sympathy for the man. I don't care what he said about how he was feeling. And it's going to be very hard for him to show, even over 50 years, that he really has, done any work on that and that his view has changed. So although this is very upsetting not to see a whole life order because of the law, I'd like to assure people that it's going to be extremely difficult for him ever to see the outside of a prison again.
Well, it will, Helen, and that is somewhat reassuring. But I think, because of the severity of the offences and because of his behaviour, I'm afraid that, and you will know this of all people, the premise of justice being done and justice being seen to be done, yes, 51 years, of course, is a long, long time. But many people, and I suspect this will be on the front pages of most newspapers tomorrow, and it's certainly a theme that is recurring in front of me here by way of what callers are saying and text messages, is that if you are 17, regardless of whether you're 8 days away from your 18th birthday or not, if you are able and willing enough as a 17-year-old, a nearly adult in the eyes of the law, to commit such atrocities, you should be dealt with as an adult on the basis that you have committed those atrocities, because the effect, the outcome of your intentions and your crime is the same regardless. So my question to you is, do you think that the sentencing guidelines now need to be modernised, tweaked, adapted, changed because of this instance, because of this case?
Yes, and I have to say, it's not just this case. We're seeing increasing amounts of young people, quite young teenagers, sort of 12 to 14, engaging in really serious violence, repeated stabbings, repeated knife crime. And the information they have access to on the internet, these are all causes that really give us pause to take another look, in fact, and just, consider whether or not there should be a flat age or whether or not, in relation to everyone under the age of 18 who offends, the first thing that happens is that the court directs there to be an assessment of their psychology, their psychiatry, to see how much they really understood about what they were doing.
And Judge Goose did refer to that, didn't he, in terms of, yes, there was evidence of autism, and I think he referred to, he didn't use the words, but it came across as an element of ADHD, but actually that did not affect his capacity, it did not affect his mental age, and therefore Judge Goose said, as a consequence of that, there was no mitigation. The same as he's really, and people should be heartened to hear this, that we have a judge that decided to not be swayed almost one iota by so-called mitigation in terms of, for instance, his very, very late guilty plea. I mean, I guess he could have reduced the sentence as a consequence of that guilty plea, but he was having none of it, Helen.
No, I mean, he said the judges have to go through they have to jump a few hurdles. So they have to say, if there's been a guilty plea at some point, they have to say they've taken it into account. The result of that would have been absolutely minimal. It will not have made any practical difference at all. Really, what the judge was emphasising over and over again is that the things he were taking into account was all the things that made this more serious, not any of the mitigation.
Helen Fields, thank you very much indeed for your expert analysis and explanation. Helen Fields, former criminal barrister there. Let's go to one of the many calls that are coming in here at Talk. Jim from Worcestershire. Jim, what do you want to say?
Hello, Russell. In 50 years' time, the Pro Board, the composition of the Pro Board, may not be old enough for to have witnessed the crime that we've seen committed live. It's awful, really, that 3 children should be killed in this way. And also, all of the other children have been subjected to the attacks that this guy made. I think that the age gap has got to be reduced now. This man is an adult, no doubt about that, and he may very well have known what he was doing and known of the timescale involved to have committed this crime and get away with a whole life sentence. I don't know. But I'm very suspicious.
Well, I think at 17 years and 355 days old, you are probably of the same mind, capability and so on as you are when you are 18. Now, I know you have to have a cut-off point, but I think, look, these days we know that kids grow up quicker. And that is why, of course, the counter-argument is that's why the Labour government would like to see votes at the age of 16. And you can't have it both ways, can you, Jim?
No, we can't. And something has to be done about this. I believe in being ruthless with this question of knifing. There has to be a ruthless attitude to prevent the level of knifing that's taking place in this country. The lad that's just been killed at 12 years of age in Birmingham, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, it's almost a daily occurrence. Jim, I'm going to ask you a question, and many might react to this with even more phone calls and texts. Do you think we should bring back capital punishment?
Well, one guy earlier today said yes, he would like to see it brought back.
But what do you think?
Well, I think yes, but I know a lot of people would bitch against that. But
I can tell you something. I am not an advocate of capital punishment on the basis that I don't think we're a barbaric society, and I don't think it's a deterrent. It certainly wouldn't have been a deterrent against Axel Rudic-Cabana, because I think as a psychopath, as he clearly is, he would have done this anyway. However, today, listening to the sentencing, listening to some of the accounts coming out of the court, listening to some of the victim statements, I've got to tell you, Jim, I think I've changed my mind.
Well, barbarism is a point against it, Russell. Fair enough. It does seem barbaric, but what else can we do?
Look, Jim, I've got to move on, I'm afraid, because, busy show for all the wrong reasons, I'm afraid. Look, Jim from Worcestershire, thank you very much indeed for your call. Going to go to a break now. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk, this is Drive. Back with more of this in a sec.
fatal stabbings of children. Last week, a 14-year-old stabbed to death in broad daylight on a bus. A 12-year-old stabbed to death. A 14-year-old under arrest. Question: how do we tackle knife crime? Because I'm not sure the government's got a good plan on this. No. Certainly don't think the London Mayor Sadiq Khan has a good plan on this. How do we actually tackle knife crime? Because I've got a funny feeling it's kind of about the people more than it is about the actual weapons.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk, the home of common sense and free speech. And if ever there was a day for free speech and a bit of common sense, it's today, isn't it? OK, the sentencing of Axel Rudakabana, as you've heard over the last 45 minutes or so, that sentencing has now been laid down. Axel Rudakabana will serve a minimum of 51 years in prison. Some of you might say that's not enough. We're certainly having a debate, and it seems from the text messages coming in and the phone calls that some of you would have liked to have seen a whole of life tariff. But as we just heard from a former criminal barrister, that is unfortunately not possible because of the sentencing guidelines. Look, I'm joined now by Harry Cole, who's the political editor of The Sun. Harry, your reaction, I guess, first of all, to the sentencing itself. Seems a lot, seems severe, but some are going to be presumably calling for even more. Yeah, even though the judge did as much as he could do.
I've just come up from the Sun newsroom floor, and it's very rare you have the entire newsroom in silence, all glued to a television, watching, hanging on every word of that judgment. It's amazing, actually, that we've come so far that you get to see these things on TV now. I think it's totally the right thing to do. Justice must be seen to be done. Look, 9 days short of his 18th birthday, I think the judge has thrown every single possible thing, but as much as a book as he is legally possible to throw within.
Did he do a good job?
Yeah, I think he did. Look, it's clear he wanted to bang him up for his whole life. It's pretty clear he's probably not going to get out before he's a very old man. I'd be amazed if he gets through the next couple of years in prison at this rate, frankly.
Well, I was going to say that.
The level of detail about the crimes that have come out now in the last in the sentencing, the only thing that scumbag has done is plead guilty to spare the full trial. But that came at the last.
He has, but
minute.
Also played up, and as the juvenile psychopath that he is. Yeah, and as is the trait of all serial killers, it seems, for the sake of garnering attention to himself.
Whatever.
If it's of any consolation to him, as I said earlier on, I think he does go down in history for all the wrong reasons, alongside Myra Hindley, Ian Huntley and Ian Brady.
I think he goes down, and I think we forget about Eva. I think we forget he even exists, and let's remember the memories of those poor girls that are killed, and the life-changing injuries given to and the injuries to the people that put themselves in danger,
and the psychological effect on Southport and the victims that were there, and of course teachers that have now been victims, have been stabbed in the process of what he did, but also now had to give witness statements, victim statements today. I mean, I can't imagine how on earth they managed to hold that together, frankly.
After tomorrow's papers, I hope we never hear this scumbag's name ever again.
Well, no, indeed, and I've been hesitant in saying it, but of course we should. And as Peter Blexley said earlier on, we must make sure that there is enough about this to ensure that a future parole board, albeit in 51 years' time, understands the disgust, the severity, the evilness of it. Look, let's talk about the politics of this, Harry, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Because this will get political tomorrow.
Well, it's been political from day one, this story, hasn't it?
Well, it has, whether it be the consequential unrest and riots, whether it be the potential cover-up by government and so on. We can talk about that all day, but I think if we could just look forward kind of 24, 48 hours, do we now think, and I hate to put it this way, but this is what I think might happen, is that politicians on all sides of Parliament, whoever they are, Conservatives, Reform, Liberal Democrats even, and particularly Labour as the government, will now see this as an opportunity to grandstand a little bit, particularly over the changing of sentencing guidelines, which a lot of people will be calling for.
So, I mean, if you can see how this week's played out, Keir Starmer came out very quickly on Monday morning at 8 a.m. to give a press conference about about this. It's the only and first time I think I can remember Sir Keir, sorry, give me a correct title, Sir Keir ever criticising the law.
Yeah.
He says, look, if this wasn't terrorism, then it was clearly designed to terrorise, so therefore he would have been able to be given a whole life sentence even if he was under 21.
Well, even though Keir Starmer was part of the cohort that set the sentencing guidelines when he was.
But I think politicians are finally waking up, and I think they're probably late to the party. We saw what happened in the scenes we saw in over the summer, but the level of public anger and disgust about this not just this story, not just this horrific incident, but just generally the sort of head banging that people have to go through now when they look at soft sentencing and letting people out after letting people out after half their sentences. Prisons are full, letting people out that shouldn't be walking the streets who are allowed out. I do think that if we have to sit through a little bit of grandstanding for something to change, then I can get on board with that.
But Harry, I don't want politicians to see this as a means of getting credit for.
No, but as long as I totally get your point. But as long as the law is toughened up, as long as the laws are rewritten in this inquiry that may have been set up to avoid claims of a cover-up. Keir Starmer saying, look, he did know about these things, but he was told he didn't want to risk collapsing the trial. Something has gone dangerously and badly wrong in this case. And the correct result is we do have a proper public inquiry into it. If we have to have a bit of politicians grandstanding while we get there, I think in the long run, hopefully, the results of the questions that are answered will be worth having to sit through.
Well, as long as it's not the old trick of just kicking this into the long grass, so that the outcome is in 3 years' time, and everyone's kind of high. I would hope we'd never forget about this case, but you know how human behaviour is. We of course haven't seen the terms of reference for this inquiry, so it may well be that in Yvette Cooper's kind of enthusiasm to announce this the other day in the Commons, that the terms of reference actually ensure that, let's say, the inquiry looks in the right places and not the wrong places from a government's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the sort of the charge list on the failures of the state. Yes, Prevent. There's already been an investigation into Prevent that said it's not really fit for purpose, and people are slipping through the cracks. Yes, he didn't fit into a far right nutter or a jihadi Islamist label, as the judge said. He said, look, we can't give you a terrorist label, but what you did was clearly a terror act, but you can't charge you for it.
Yeah.
We need to have all of that out. We need to look at Prevent properly, not just why did but is Prevent fit for purpose?
And the authorities, because even if he didn't fit the profile as a terrorist, you would imagine that whether it be sectioning him under the Mental Health Act or the police doing something should have been done.
Caught carrying a knife 10 times, turned up to school with a knife, turned up, was googling, googling school shootings. Like the red flags were literally
red and massive. Yes. Let's talk about Never Mind the Ballots.
Yeah. So we talked about this today. We had Matt Goodwin, who's a professor. He's a very stringent sort of anti-migration sort of thinker.
He pulls no punches, does he?
He does not. And we had Dan Hodges, who's a commentator who was they ended up agreeing, frankly, because there's not much you can disagree on all of this.
Can we see a clip?
Yeah, let's do it.
I think the vast majority of people in this country smell a cover-up, and they smell hypocrisy and double standards, because if you look at how Keir Starmer has responded to previous attacks, whether you think about attacks here in Westminster, whether you think about the Finsbury Park mosque attack, even Labour politicians responding to Joe Cox, some of these cases were considered terrorism within 18 minutes, Harry. This time around, suddenly we've had ambivalence, we've had obfuscation, we've had a refusal to release details to the public. He's been hiding behind this contempt of court nonsense. And again, it all adds up to a two-tier Keir narrative that actually, had this been related to the far right, had this been related to some white guy with far-right literature on his PC, we all would have known about it within 10 minutes. This time around, suddenly it's different.
So that's on the Talk and, of course, the Sun YouTube channel right now. Dan Hodges apparently had a rather different view to Matt Goodwin, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fear of collapsing this trial, but the problem is
do you think that was over-egged?
Well, I think it probably was, because the bar for the contempt, the government admitted Yvette Cooper admitted the other day, look, contempt of court laws in the modern age don't quite work, because if you say nothing, you allow a vacuum to be filled by social media,
when we had the Parsons Green issue and Joe Cox and so on, it was immediately labelled by the government, and their narrative was that it was terrorism.
There's also the fact is that, in previous times, the fact that someone was known to the authorities, it might not be announced by a minister, but, the nod has been given, shall we say.
Yeah.
What feels weird and what people are angry about, and I think what people are mystified about, is in this case, and yes, because there were riots in the subsequent days, there seems to have been a sort of almost overcautious desire not to say anything about it, when actually that perhaps was as dangerous as saying something was not saying it, because people thought, well, what is going on? How could something so horrific happen to such innocent people? There must be something we're not being told, and that anger, manifested itself.
Well, it did, and the judge again went to great pains today. I mean, to talk about should we just call him the assailant rather than mentioning his name? Talked about obviously his history, and there was clear evidence of him having murderous intent. They found apparently not just ricin, but they found a crossbow and a zombie knife under his bed, and so on and so forth. But he also went to great pains to say that Axel Rudolph did not cause the summer riots. Some here might say, I'll choose my words carefully, that actually it was that vacuum caused by certain politicians that did.
There was a lot. All of these things are slightly more complicated than just describing one factor to them. But I think in the modern age, the state has got, the fact we were sitting there watching the judge deliver those remarks is a remarkable development in how the state, is opened up. That needs to be goes all the way down through the system, from arrest to charge.
Hope it does. Harry, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid.
No, of course,
fast-moving show. Thank you very much for coming in from upstairs.
Got a lot of angry people there.
We'll be back after this. Back after the news. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. This is Drive.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
OK, welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. I am in the hot seat for Drive today of all days. Look, a busy show, I'm afraid, for all the wrong reasons. Lots of calls, lots of texts. Join in with your thoughts, your opinions, 0344 499 1000, or you can text, of course, 87222 with the word talk before you message. You can leave a voice note, actually, if you are somewhat hesitant in actually talking because you're so upset by all of this, particularly the narrative around the sentencing, victim statements and so on, and some of the stuff actually that's on social media which is going into far too much graphic detail. I'm all for freedom of speech, as is this show, but the parents of these poor little girls have said specifically, please do not talk about and describe the injuries, the things that happened to these little girls in detail. We should respect that, I think. We should respect that, but some people, it seems, are not. So yes, today of all days, fast-moving show for all the wrong reasons, but delighted to be joined now by yet another expert on all of this, Mike Neville, ex-Scotland Yard detective. Mike, where do we begin? First of all, what do you think about the sentencing? Would you have liked to have seen the judge been able to go further? Obviously, he couldn't go further. I'm not criticising Judge Goose, by the way. He did everything, and we've had this confirmed by a former criminal barrister. He did everything he could in terms of the sentencing guidelines. Do those sentencing guidelines need to change? Do we think?
I think, firstly, I'd congratulate Mr Justice Goose. I think he's done everything he can within the restrictions he had. So 52 years, that's an incredibly long sentence.
But it still means, Mike, he could be out at the age of 69 years old.
He could be, I agree. But I think Mr Justice Goose has done as much as he can. But I agree that these things need to change. I was a soldier at 16 years old. So at 18...
So you're carrying a gun at 16 years old.
You're a man, you know. And so we've got to look at this. We're told by politicians that people should be able to vote at 16 and they're an adult and all this. And then when they do the most wicked crimes like this, then we're told it's a child. Well, which one is it along the way? So I think we need to look at society here. People mature earlier. He obviously was aware of the wickedness of his act and he should be sentenced. He's lucky not to be hanged, really. That's what that would, you know. That.
Well, he knew his mind, that's for sure, and the judge made that very clear, that despite, you know, maybe an attempt at mitigation on the basis that apparently this perpetrator, as we will call him, you know, suffered perhaps or had evidence of autism, ADHD and so on, and the judge made it very, very clear that that did not figure as mitigation. It didn't make any difference. He did have, you know, leave of his senses, or such, he did have his senses about him, so he was not swayed by that. Look, I hope that actually there is a change to the sentencing guidelines, because I think someone that commits such a horrific crime as this should do all of the time possible and should be in prison forever. A, because they deserve the punishment, B, because justice has to be seen to be done. But also, even at 69 years old, if some hapless parole board in 51 years' time says, yeah, I think he's OK now, he's rehabilitated, believe me, he won't be. This guy needs to be away, so we are protected, society is protected. I made a comment earlier, which, you know, it is a hard thing to say, but I'm trying to kind of rationalise with myself the enormity of this individual, this evil monster's crime. Do you see him as I do, and without glorifying him or what he has done, and I'm not doing that, I'm just putting this into perspective, do we see the crimes of this individual up there with the Moors murderers and Ian Huntley?
They're absolutely so wicked, it does count for that. And it's not just the murder of the three little girls, it is the impact he's had on all the other children and the parent. This man, not the Moors murderers, six victims. Him, how many victims? 25, 30, 40, all the people who were there.
Well, he made it very clear he intended to kill more.
And he's injured, but just a sight. I had 3 daughters. Imagine them just seeing
And
this.
how do you feel about that? I've got 3 daughters. How old are your daughters?
I've got 2 younger ones, so like 11 and 13, and an older daughter who's a nurse.
So dads like you and I, so my daughters are 16, 15 and 15. You know, to everybody, this is horrendous, this is heinous. It's hard for anyone to get their head around what this monster has done. When you're a mum or dad, and I have to say, particularly when you've got daughters, there is a certain amount of extra reflection, I think, where you realise, from an empathy point of view as a father, just how absolutely horrendous and hideous this is. Because whether you like it or not, your thoughts turn to your own daughters. Have you found that?
Absolutely. You know, you just live in fear because you send your children to... One of my daughters loves to do acting and goes away to this sort of thing. And when you send them there, the nice warm adults are there, everything's happy, just like these young girls were in a happy place, making friendship, but all those girly things that are so lovely to see when you're a father. They're in a nice, safe place, and then utter wickedness arrives.
Mike, there was a comment made by somebody earlier on, and that was along the lines of the way that he will be treated in prison. Now, again, I'll be very careful and very clear here. I and Talk are not advocating anything other than him serving his sentence, but you're a former police officer that knows your way around these things. What do you think waits for him in prison over the next 51 years?
Well, a lot of solitary confinement, because even the most wicked criminals, but criminals who do armed robberies and all sorts of crime, they've got daughters. And the worst thing you can be in prison is a child molester or a child murderer. So he'll have to be very, very careful.
Do you think he'll be in solitary for 51 years?
Well, he'll be in solitary for a long time, because he will be such a risk. The other prisoners will be gunning for him, really, and it'll be easier for the prison authorities to just keep him away from everybody else, because he will be at risk of being seriously stabbed. The prisoners make knives out of razor blades and plastic sharp. They'll always find a way. We've seen recently killers who've been stabbed. One of the killed drummer Rigby, he's been beaten up again. And so this happens. People, they have revenge, and they'll have revenge on people. In their minds, they will inflict justice on those who kill children.
What about prison officers that are fathers and mothers?
Well, prison officers are professionals, and they deal with the most...
But they're human beings.
They are human beings, but like police officers, they're professionals. They won't be after harming anybody. They'll make sure that his life is possibly a misery, but that won't be done through any violence or anything like that. Prison officers they'll act professional, they'll deal with it, because if they don't, then they become a victim of his wickedness as well.
We've talked about the question of remorse, and of course this individual has shown the opposite of remorse. He glorified the killing of the girls when he was arrested. So, as the judge said today, in an unsolicited way, in other words, not under caution, not being interviewed, he decided to start shooting his mouth off about the effectively how happy he was that these poor young girls had died and been killed. I think he also asked how old the youngest one was. What an abhorrent, evil, disgusting individual. And how do you as police officers cope with that?
As a police officer, you have to remain utterly professional, because the moment you hit them, or if you do anything to them that's beyond the rules, a defence barrister will be all over that, and they're more likely to get off. And so as a police officer, you have to just shut your mind to it. Just like a prison officer, you have to deal with this individual, make sure the evidence is there, because the best thing you can do is make sure this creature is locked up and it can't get out again.
Good word, Mike, creature. Let's talk about how he slipped through the cracks. Now, to be clear, obviously he was reported to Prevent 3 times, not once, not twice, but 3 times. Prevent, of course, is the organisation, as I understand it, that is tasked with spotting potential terrorists. It was seen, rightly or wrongly, that this individual, Axel Rudikabana, I should mention his name every now and again, so that we know who we're talking about, that he did not fit the MO, the profile of a terrorist. OK, so let's say that the terms of reference that that particular organisation, Prevent, was working to, let's say they did the right thing by way of those terms of reference. Let's just assume that might be wrong, by the way. They may have just been negligent. I don't know. But what about all of the other authorities, the other layers of society, the police, the social services organisations, mental health organisations? How on earth does this individual slip through the cracks? I mean, this is an individual that admitted to taking a knife to school 10 times. This is an individual that was cooking up potential ricin under his bed. This is someone that a week before this incident had to be prevented by his father from going and committing an atrocity at his old school. how on earth, and I know look, I don't want to cast aspersions about any one particular element of those authorities, how on earth does someone like this that then goes on to indeed do what he's done, how do they slip through the cracks of authority in this country? And how do we stop it happening again?
Well, I think there's two possible reasons. Firstly, you have the fact that there are so many of these individuals. There'll be so few people employed by Prevent, and I would estimate there's hundreds of people who've been referred a number of times. And like, I was in charge of a sex offender unit at Lambeth. There was just too many sex offenders to manage. So there's a great scheme brought out like Prevent, and all these, you know, and we'll prevent this, and we'll speak to these people. But then there's so many people reported, it doesn't get dealt with. On the other side as well, you have ridiculous things being dealt with by Prevent, like a vicar being told that reading out the Bible about homosexuality or something, oh, that's a terrorist or something, and people, they get involved in nonsense. So,
do we think if the police weren't policing, you know, such things as nasty social media posts and people saying things about their neighbours that their neighbours don't like on Facebook and so on, do we think if perhaps the police in particular were not focused on such things, you know, knocking on journalists' doors as they did, of course, with Alison Pearson in Essex, my county, do we think that actually people like Axel Rudiger might not slip through the net quite as much if those resources were properly deployed?
If the resources were properly
why
deployed.
aren't they?
Well, because they're not. Because the police have lost their focus over the last few years. They've lost their focus on burglary, robbery, theft, and this violent crime against women and girls in particular. And they've focused on online policing, looking at these tweets, looking at what journalists are saying.
Dancing with people at the Notting Hill Carnival, in rainbow police cars.
All this sort of, that just shows a lack of focus. The police need to be refocused on that.
But Mike, they're supposed to be accountable. That's why they brought in, many years ago, under the Conservatives, police and crime commissioners. I mean, they seem to be absolutely bloody useless, worthless. What's the point of police and crime commissioners who are elected to be accountable to chief constables and to police forces? It's got worse.
It has got worse. And when you look at, I looked at, the police are judged on 8 categories. One of the categories goes to investigating crime. At least half the police forces are inadequate or not good enough in that category. That's their basic role, and all the time what we see is the police dragged away by senior officers to dealing with like things that they shouldn't be involved in. As you said, the police in the tweets and not the streets. That needs to stop. But what needs to happen, if they're going to run things like Prevent, and that's not necessarily the police, then there needs to be adequate resources in there, and also those adequate resources need to be focused on the right thing. And one of the big problems here, one of the massive problems here, and we've seen it, is the attempts by the government to sort of cover up the whole thing. The idea that you cannot say a motive or things happen is utter rubbish. The Prime Minister came out and talked utter rubbish. When people have done things in the past, we've been told it was an IRA attack or whatever, this person. If it was a white skinhead who'd run in and stabbed outrageously 3 Asian girls or 3 black girls and been found with a copy of Mein Kampf, that would have been released straight away. And what we have here, we have a real big problem, that if we don't acknowledge there was an issue with militant Islamism, and he had his Al-Qaeda handbook, if we keep talking, the Prime Minister talked about people getting hold of a knife online. Every kitchen drawer is full of murder weapons. It's rubbish.
That knee-jerk reaction by the government that they're going to tighten up on where you can buy knives from, on the basis that there are probably 100 million knives in kitchens and
absolutely
chefs' drawers all over the country, is absolutely ludicrous. It's like saying that you're going to kind of, I don't know, persecute driving schools because someone drove into a crowd of people at an event. But yet again, that's the government missing the point, smashing the gangs and so on, rather than smashing the individuals that are actually doing it and preventing those instances from happening at the ground floor. Of course, they seek to do it kind of through some proxy default. It makes absolutely no sense. And again, it just shows how out of touch our politicians are, I'm afraid. OK, so what you're saying about the police is it a question then? We keep hearing it's about resource and money. I heard somebody earlier on, not on this channel, but on another one I was flicking through, I kid you not, almost blaming what has happened in Southport on austerity. Now, obviously, the police service, the justice system. Everybody needs money, everybody needs funding. But it's a bit like the NHS argument, Mike. You cannot just keep blindly pumping money into organisations without there being accountability. Somebody within the police service, within the judiciary, within the NHS, within Border Force and so on, needs to get their organisational efficiency right first and then work out how much money they need. The NHS, and I think the police is no different, the NHS now cost the taxpayer something like £200 billion a year. More and more money gone in per patient, waiting lists have not gone down. The same applies to the police. I think, and again, with no disrespect to your former colleagues and the rank and file, I know this comes from above and senior police officers that don't understand, don't get it, have never probably walked the beat in their life or whatever. But we've got to get to a position of accountability with the police, getting police out on the streets to be preventative. I mean, where I live in Essex, Mike, I never see the police. And I'm not kidding. And I walk a lot. I just don't see the police. I see them responding to incidents, but I don't see them preventatively. It's not like 20, 30 years ago where you would see the police either in cars or on bikes or walking on the beat preventatively. Now, we've got more police officers in the UK than ever. 147,000 police officers. Where are they?
Right, a lot of them are too much inside. What they did, and there's a lot of lack of experience. What happened under Theresa May? So all the parties, all the mainstream parties...
Well, she chopped police officers by 20,000.
They are all to blame here. She got rid of those officers. It's all right bringing new officers in, but instead of having officers on a shift with 20 years' experience, now they have somebody with 2 and 3 is a veteran. So you've got a lot of lack of experience. And you've got this lack of focus. I'll give you an example. The Metropolitan Police, there's 8 categories they're judged on. Out of 7, they were judged inadequate. What's one of their...
7 out of 8?
7 out of 8 inadequate. What's their focus? We'll have a new diversity directorate and we'll have a race action plan. We really need President Trump to come back and say, right, all those people in the diversity directorate are now on the squad that's going to target violence against women and girls. They need to be refocused on what they're doing, but I'm afraid under a Labour government, you're never going to get this because they're obsessed with that establishment, liberal left view of the world.
Diversity first.
And so what's happened is, and also with police officers, they're recruiting the wrong people. They used to recruit a lot of ex-soldiers. They don't do that anymore. They recruit students who last for 2 and 3 years and then leave. Not like people like me who stay in for the whole whack. So you've got wrong people. And also with money, just like you say, you could give them £1 billion a day, but they wouldn't change. No, they wouldn't focus on burglary and robbery.
No accountability. And is it still the case that to be a police officer, for some odd reason, you have to have a university degree?
Well, some of them have changed that. So some of them are gradually changing away from that. And what you've gone from is a training method, which was basically, I left the army and went to almost an army training establishment at Hendon with sergeants marching around with pay sticks. You've now gone to, it's a university degree and utterly woke. Everything is focused on...
Well, but universities, by definition, as soon as you go to university and absorb the wokeness, when you then go out into the big wide world, particularly if you then decide to become a police officer, you're going to translate that wokeness into your police job. Mike, look, we could talk all day, I'm sure. Look, thank you very much indeed for your input. Thanks for being here. We're going to have to take a break, but back after this with about a gazillion calls, by the looks of it. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk, this is Drive.
face an existential threat in this country. A wave of migration that we have seen, and I read a report overnight, suggested that there are something like 500,000 illegal migrants in our capital city. The British people are entitled to demand of their politicians an end to this, what my mother described in a letter to the Daily Telegraph in 1967 as alien invasion. It has got to stop.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. This is Drive. I'm here till 7 o'clock. And of course, we are talking almost exclusively, probably will be exclusively, about the sentencing today of Southport killer. He is a killer, multiple killer, Axel Rudakubana. Don't want to say his name, but I guess, yes, for the purposes and for the reasons that we've outlined already on this show, I guess we need to keep saying it so that it is not forgotten on the basis that he is evil. He is a monster, and he is now going to rot in prison for 51 years. There is always the possibility that he comes out in 51 years' time, depending on the integrity and the capability and the attitude of the parole board at the time. But we are a long way away from that. The judge today, Judge Goose, resoundingly, actually, all of our guests and indeed all of our texts, all of our phone calls have said that Judge Goose seems to be a far cry from some of the criticism we've had of the judiciary in recent years in terms of their liberal approach. Judge Goose could not be accused of such. Let's just go to a clip of that sentencing again. And bearing in mind, I'm not sure which clip we're going to use exactly, but it may well, as a caution, contain some graphic content in terms of the description of what happened to those poor young girls. But let's listen to the sentencing being given out about an hour and a half ago.
I'm now going to sentence Axel Rudakubana, having explained my reasons. On counts 1 to 3 murder, I sentence him to custody for life with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years, less the time he's served already. He's been in custody for 175 days on remand, which will be credited. Therefore, the minimum term is 51 years and 190 days.
So the culmination of this sentencing today, which of course has lasted all day, further to Rudakubana's guilty plea at the last minute earlier on this week, is 51 years. Some of you, even though the judge did, it seems, as we've had confirmed by a former criminal barrister, Helen Field, earlier on, it was the maximum that judge could have been given under the sentencing guidelines. Do the sentencing guidelines need to be changed? They need to be different. Let's just talk to you about what people are saying by way of text messages here to Talk today, and then we'll go to some callers. Richard Luton says, divide 52 years by 3, those 3 little girls, and this is what this country is saying your toddlers' lives are worth. I hate this country, he says. I'm not ashamed of Britain's past, but I'm ashamed of Britain's present. What a cover-up. My prayers are with the families. Julia Forrest says, good afternoon, Russell. Regarding the sentence for this evil piece of, I'll just say it rhymes with rap, we must bring back the death penalty. Well, look, I've raised that as a question. 0344 499 1000, if we've got any room on the switchboard, frankly. Do you agree? Do you think the death penalty, capital punishment, should be brought back, particularly for evil monsters like this? I'm not sure it's a preventative, but at least it will feel to some of us that justice has properly been done. Let's talk to Simon in West Yorkshire. Simon, what did you want to say about today's proceedings?
Hi, Russell. Thanks for hearing me out. Yeah, I'm a bit like you. I'm sort of more in favour of the death penalty than I was before, especially when there's a clear case where the judge has said this guy wasn't mentally disturbed, so it's a clear case of he's just evil.
Yeah.
But
a psychopath, right? So he might not be mentally disturbed, but he's clearly a psychopath.
Well, yes. And number two, it's going to cost us about £3 million to keep this guy in prison at £1,000 a week, just under £3 million.
That sticks in the throat, doesn't it?
Well, protecting him from us, it'd be more like he'd be getting protection from other people, I would have thought, if you know what I mean. And I think the other thing is that prison is supposed to re-educate us or re-educate the perpetrator. But in this case, what's the point? Because he ain't coming out.
Yeah.
So just let him swing. Let's let him swing. Save the money. I don't a penny of taxpayers' money paid on this jerk. It's absolutely outrageous.
And Simon, I think
I'm not in favour of.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying is probably reflected by a lot of people listening to this. People like me, like you, that were not necessarily in favour of the death penalty previously, because some of us see it as barbaric in a civilised society, which I think we still live in, and that it's probably not a preventative, but it, as I say, perhaps metes out some kind of justice. But it would make us all feel better, you think?
Well, I think you've only got to try, even if you could possibly try, and I couldn't, and you couldn't, and put yourself in the place of those lovely children's parents and grandparents.
Are you a father, Simon?
And sisters and aunties.
Are you a father?
How would? So yes, I am. My daughter's 32, but I'm a new I've got my first grandchild. She's absolutely cracking. But it's just the whole thing is just and to have the temerity to actually say what he said before he went up in front of the beak was absolutely. I mean, that just shows the measure of the man, and he's not a man.
And what are you referring to in particular? Because we heard, of course, today some of the things that he said when he was arrested. So unsolicited, without being prompted or asked or interviewed, he wasn't under caution. He said, "I'm glad those girls are dead." I mean, an absolutely unbelievable statement to make. I'm glad they're dead. I want to know the age of the youngest. I'm glad and I'm very happy. Again, a psychopath.
Well, I think the other burning question, which we don't know, is what drives anybody to do that? I'd like somebody to have sat down and said, "Look, just tell me why you did it. What reason did you possibly have to do it?"
Simon, do you think we haven't heard much from the parents? The parents weren't in court. They have moved. They're in hiding. Yeah, they're in hiding. And look, I'm not suggesting that they are to blame, but I think most would agree with me that there has to be an element of accountability. I mean, who are you as parents if you end up bringing up someone like Axel Rudwicana?
Well, exactly that. And I think all the liberal people out there, where we've been stuffed up with all this liberal nonsense for the last God knows how many years, spare the rod, spoil the child, and we are inheriting the whirlwind for it. I'm telling you, this is what it's all about. The line in the sand has been withdrawn. And the kids don't know they do know, but they just get away with it because they know that there's no punishment really. I mean, they can just do what they like, and report the parents to the police because they he slapped me or he's given me a tap or whatever it is. So the whole thing is just, this is what we're inheriting now. This is the society that we now have, thanks to all the liberal-minded nannies.
What we do, and a society also where we expect that the authorities within it, the government of the day, to protect us, and in particular our children. And as we've said and rehearsed on this station many, many, many times, he in particular, because of the inability for the authorities to bring him to task, to neutralise him in previous months and years despite his behaviour. I mean, the authorities have let us down. There is no doubt about it, and there will be an inquiry, but I don't have a lot of faith in government inquiries, Simon. I don't know about you, because I think they take too long, and I suspect the terms of reference will be rather vague. Anyway, Simon, thank you very much indeed for your call, and I feel you, as they say, because all of us, particularly mums and dads that have kids, really have, well, I can't begin to think what the parents have gone through and are going through, but we have a semblance of empathy, I have to say. There has been a statement by our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. Let me read that to you in full. The thoughts of the entire nation are with the families and everyone affected by the unimaginable horrors that unfolded in Southport. No words will ever be able to capture the depth of their pain. I want to say directly to the survivors' families and the community of Southport, you are not alone. We stand with you in your grief. What happened in Southport was an atrocity, and as the judge has stated, this vile offender will likely never be released. And after one of the most harrowing moments in our country's history, we owe it to these innocent young girls and all those affected to deliver the change that they deserve. Now, what he means by change, we don't quite know. I suspect there'll be a number of press statements and grandstanding in Parliament. I'm personally sick of hearing in such instances that there will be lessons learned, there will be an inquiry, or that we are going to make changes, often in a very, very kind of opportunistic and populist way to try and prevent things like this happening again. I would suggest that this individual, as we well know, having been caught taking a knife to school a number of times and having been expelled, suspended and goodness knows what else, having been violent multiple times, having had violent tendencies, having been reported to the authorities several times, the police knowing him, in fact he had a conviction previously, whether it be the authorities, the police, Prevent, or indeed the parents, the school, all of those are in some way partially responsible for this evil monster slipping through the net to end up doing what he did in Southport all those months ago. It is absolutely horrendous, and I think, frankly, a few people have blood on their hands. Let's go to another caller now. I think we've got another. Oh no! So I'm being told that I'm overrunning. Not surprising, really, because I'm afraid there's a lot to talk about. We're going to go to a break. When we come back, there will be some more calls. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk. I am in for Peter Caldwell, who will be back next week, I hope. This is Drive, and unsurprisingly, the show dominated by the sentencing today of Axel Rudickabana, who has received a minimum term of 51 years. He was actually sentenced to 52 years, but of course he has served 100 plus days or so in custody. 51 years, what do you think about that? Is that enough? Unfortunately, the judge gave him as good as he could. He certainly maxed out those sentencing, the sentence based on the sentencing guidelines available to him. Now we're going to talk, before we go to calls, by the way, to Richard Tice. Actually, we managed to get hold of Richard Tice MP, who is, of course, the Deputy Leader of Reform. Richard Tice will have a lot to say about this, I suspect, particularly, Richard, your reaction to the sentence itself.
I have to say I'm still in shock. I've never been so horrified by listening to anything to do with that sentencing was just mind-boggling, horrendous. And clearly the judge would have given whole of life if the monster had been just 9 days older. And look, 51 and a half years, I gather the breaking news that someone's applied for a review of that it's not long enough. And the judge made it clear he didn't expect Rudolph Garner to come out of prison. But, now once we get over today, we've actually got to ask some serious questions. And, should we have whole of life for people under the age of 18? That's a question. We've got to review our contempt of court laws, as other countries do it slightly differently. France does it slightly differently. I called for the Home Secretary yesterday that we need to relook at that, because I think the public want more information. And also, given the details that came out from the judge, Russell, in terms of Rudy Kobana's interest in massacres, his interest in genocide.
Well, he became a scholar of death.
Yeah, but hear me out. If that's not terror, I don't know what is. The bloke had an Al-Qaeda training manual in his bedroom. If that's not political or ideological, I don't know what is.
Would it have made a difference to the sentence, though, Richard?
No, I don't think it would. But I think, look, we mourn the loss and the horror of what's gone on. But frankly, we now have to ask some searching, serious questions of people in positions of authority who have made appalling misjudgments. One of which is the Director of Public Prosecutions, Stephen Parkinson, at the Crown Prosecution Service, who clearly made the decision to instruct the police not to call this a terror incident. It was, anybody in their right, sane, sensible frame of mind would have determined that. I think Mr. Parkinson needs to consider his position. We're basically saying he should resign. No longer do I believe the CPS, under his leadership, has the confidence of the British people.
And Richard, why do you think he made that decision? Are you suggesting that there is a two-tier ethnicity angle here?
The only thing I can think of is political correctness. Something has changed in the authorities, because if you look back at numerous lone wolf incidents, such as the horrific killing of the MP Joe Cox in 2016 by Thomas Mayer, information came out within 24 hours about that individual, and it was judged a terror incident within 24 hours, as have many other
Parsons Green
hideous crimes that have taken place that have been much less horrific, still horrific, but less horrific than this monstrosity. So something has changed, and I just think, for our system to work, the British people have to have confidence in our police, and they've got to have confidence in our Crown Prosecution Service. And I think both are under threat, and there has to be some accountability. People need to know that when people make serious judgments and get it palpably wrong, as I think the CPS have done, then frankly, people need, resignations need to follow. Likewise, the people running Prevent, there should be multiple resignations. They clearly had so much information. Heaven knows what they were thinking. Seriously.
But Richard, you're talking about the CPS in terms of their decision to lay down certain charges, some of which were terrorist related, but they've been very clear that this was not terrorism. But
and that's the point. They made a judgment in the first 24 hours, apparently, to instruct the police that this was not terror-related.
Yes, and what you're suggesting is that the reason for that is because of political correctness. But I would go back further. Do we also think that the reason that this Axel Rubicana ended up slipping through the net so many times, whether it be via Prevent or social services or the school, or the fact that he was known to have taken a knife into school 10 times, do you think there's an ethnicity angle there in terms of two-tier political correctness too?
Look, it's all related to political correctness, I think, but fundamentally, all of us, it shouldn't be about ethnicity. It should be about the competence of the people making judgments when wrong-uns, bad-uns appear before them or are referred to them by concerned citizens. And, what's the point of something like Prevent? Costing us fortunes if they're that negligent, that incompetent, that woeful, that frankly, they make such horrific judgments. Just think about this. If they had made the right judgment, and that individual, that monster had been referred, frankly, to any sane person, he probably should have been sectioned.
Well, I said that earlier on. He should be in. It should have been sectioned on the mental health.
In which case, those children would still be alive. Those children wouldn't be scarred for life, and all the horrors that flow from all of that. So, there have to be consequences to people's negligence and incompetence.
Well,
Otherwise,
and on the basis of it being a balanced and equitable justice system, that's not too much to ask for, is it? Regardless of colour, creed, race, or whatever.
Of course, that should be completely irrelevant. But it does require competence, and there have to be consequences. Look, in a private business, if people had performed so woefully as those public servants, they would have been fired. No ifs, no buts. And the same sort of accountability needs to apply to public servants in serious positions of responsibility.
Yes, of course. And as a legislator, Richard, will you be doing anything tomorrow with regard to sentencing guidelines and seeking that they are amended and tweaked to take account of young killers that are under the age of 18, particularly? And I don't see how the Labour Party can disagree with it when they think that anyone over 16 by way of voting is an adult.
I think all of that has definitely got to be looked at. Why shouldn't a 16 or 17-year-old horrific, monstrous murderer not be given a whole of life? Frankly, I mean, you could say that down to any age, but I think that's one key point. I'm also very focused on this contempt of court point. We have to go back to where we were 10, 15 years ago, where information would be released about the alleged criminal, whether or not the individual was known to the authorities, and some form of reference to that. That doesn't prejudice a free and fair and proper just trial. And we have to, if we need to legislate to change that and have some form of instant disclosure that gives the public, I think, reasonable information, as recommended by the government's own independent terrorism czar, Jonathan Hall KC, these are the sort of things of confidence and the lessons that have got to be learned.
And have you ever known an instance in Parliament where you and your colleagues, you and Lee Anderson and Rupert Lowe in particular, were prevented from raising questions about this issue in Parliament, given that you have parliamentary privilege, given that I presume you could have been taken to, I don't know, a closed session committee room to ask those questions? Have you ever known anything like that? I know you haven't been a parliamentarian here for very long, but that seems to me to be very, very unusual indeed, that parliamentarians are gagged.
It's clearly very unusual, but we were told that it was sub judice. The Speaker made that very clear. The Speaker's decision ultimately in the House of Commons is always right, and he made that decision, and he'd obviously taken advice. So,
but you think it's unusual?
Well, it's clearly unusual, and mercifully so. But this was amongst the most horrific. I don't know how many instances before, and of course, no one wants to prejudice a fair trial. But if you get to the situation where confidence is collapsing in the CPS and the police, which I believe it is, then actually legislators, as I said to the Home Secretary, have got to say, we need to change something. We've got to be brave enough. What do other countries do to overcome this same issue? And I think some other countries do it slightly better. And I think we should say to ourselves, we've got to do better too.
Indeed. Richard, I know you're on the clock, so I'm going to let you go. Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a break now, back with more of this and lots of calls after this break. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk and the Drive Show.
the child is arrested for committing a crime with a knife, the parent should be arrested as well for lack of care of the child, and then they have to disprove...
I mean, you say parents. Realistically, we know in most of these cases there isn't a dad around, certainly not in the home. Yeah. I do think, we are really going to have to talk about that. We're also going to have to talk about how often these cases involve children from certain different backgrounds, certain different communities. I don't know about you. I haven't read about a story about a whole spate of, children from Chinese families.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. It is just coming up to 10 to 6. I'm here till 7. Kevin O'Sullivan after me. He'll certainly have a lot to say about today's proceedings, I'm sure. Going to take some calls in a second, but just let me just read out some texts. Bernie Gowler says, you're spot on about the parents. They must have known he was producing ricin and having terrorist literature. They should be, well, yeah, I'm not going to read out the last bit, but let's just say that he believes they should be held to account. Also, we have here Peter from Croydon says, he was a short time away from his 18th birthday. Obviously, we're referring to the evil, murderous Axel Rudicabanner. He was a short time away from his 18th birthday. Surely that should have been considered in the sentencing. Again, where is the common sense? There's also no word about his parents being in court. I find that very odd. Surely they have got questions to answer. And Brad says, I completely disagree with the law that prevents a full life sentence, despite the fact that he was not 18. I guess, look, at the moment, the law is the law. And as we've said repeatedly, Judge Goose has done everything, and he made it very clear that he's done everything he can to give the maximum sentence that the law allowed him to do under the sentencing guidelines. He actually went as far as to say, I suspect this individual will never come out of prison, although that is not what the sentence is. The sentence, just to remind you, is 51 years, a minimum of 51 years, and then he will face the fateful parole board. Matt says, Judge Goose came to the table, laid it all out impeccably. It could have been less by a more liberal judge. I commend him. That's Matt in Swindon. Swindon? Is it the same thing? Certainly not. Mike Tomlinson says, any politician that comes out with the platitude of lessons will be learned when it happens again, and it will, because lessons will not have been learned, they should be taught a lesson that they will never forget. Well, again, back to the point about politicians kind of hand-wringing, I suppose, and talking tough, particularly at the dispatch box, particularly the government saying that they're going to do things about whether it be sentencing guidelines or applying resources into different places to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again. But frankly, when someone slips through the authorities' net so frequently, I don't think that we are going to be convinced that anything that will be done in the short term, certainly by government, police or other authorities, is going to fix such a catastrophic inability to bring this person to account and to neutralise them before carrying out the atrocity that they did in Southport a few months ago. Let's go to the phones. Dave in Southend. Dave, welcome to Talk. What did you want to say?
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Quirk.
That's very formal.
Yeah, I'm
not my dad.
Being serious now. I'm sick and tired of listening to politicians with their words. I don't want to hear from the Prime Minister. I'm sick of them. I was dismayed. In fact, I don't shock easily, but when I heard what the judge had said was happening to those poor little kiddies, and I truly believe that society now should know what these people are doing. I don't think many of us knew the severity of the attack, and I think it's angered people even more, and rightfully so. So I believe that everything should come out and the public should know what's happening. We are breeding a society of youngsters that know they can get away with murder. And I believe, and I'm not interested in what anyone else says, that the death penalty should be brought in for any age. A killer with a knife at 5, 6, 7, 10, 12 is a killer.
You want to see 7-year-olds hanged? I mean, what about the Bulger killers?
Yes, in fact, I put myself up to be the hangman. I will hang anyone because these are despicable people that have got... I'm not interested in anything about reform. And when you say about the death penalty, we're not... You're right. For the hardened criminals, it would not.
What, be a deterrent, you mean, Dave?
Yes, sir. Yeah, but for 95% of the crime, people will think twice about it.
But Dave, do you think that the death penalty, and look, as I said earlier on this show, I am being persuaded that because of individuals, monsters, let's not call him an individual, I don't see him as a human, frankly, but because of people like Axel Rudakabana, you know, there should be exceptions with people like him. But do you think that that is just us wanting, you know, revenge? I mean, do you think that's just us being vengeful rather than it being part of a kind of element of justice?
We have to take the streets back. I'm not interested in this thing being barbaric. You said, sir, that you've got 3 daughters.
Yes.
If those 3 young kiddies, I mean, God forbid what those kiddies have gone through. It just baffles me the way we're still letting this happen. But if those 3 were your 3 daughters, and you said you're not interested in up until now, how would you feel? The problem is people that don't want the death penalty don't think until this happens to them.
No, I get that, but I think the way that we feel as a society versus a dad, if God forbid anything were to happen to your kids in terms of meting out revenge, they're 2 very, very different things. And of course, look, I'll again tread very, very carefully here, but as a father, all fathers would say the same thing. If anything was done to one of their children, they would probably not be responsible for the consequences upon the person that did whatever they did. That's clear. That's just a natural human reaction. But I guess the reason that I wasn't in favour of the death penalty or capital punishment is A, because I think that we live in a civilised society. We're not barbaric. But previously, to me, it was about there not being an element of deterrent. But now I think, and like you, a lot of the details that you say that haven't come out, a lot of the details I'm afraid have. You know, when you listen to the victim statements in court today and the prosecution talking about what happened to those poor little girls, it was so graphic that broadcasters like us and others couldn't actually broadcast or repeat what had been said. It was simply too abhorrent. But that is kind of out there. It was meted out in court, and obviously the court was a public session. So yeah, I just think I guess my conclusion, Dave, is that I'm starting to agree that for certain inhuman, evil monsters that perpetrate crimes as Axel Rudakabana has, then maybe there is a place for the death penalty.
Well, the problem is we have got a parliament that won't do what they will. I believe now a referendum for the capital punishment, but those lily-livered lot, and like I said, I'm sick and tired of listening to Starmer and all that. I'm sick of them.
Well, you're going to hear a lot more about it in the next couple of days, Dave, because I fear political opportunism rearing its head. Dave, you've got to move on, but thank you very much indeed. That's Dave from Southend. Let's go to Darren in Swansea. Darren, welcome to Talk. What did you want to say?
Well, just reflecting on previous comments, Russell, my view is very simple. Whenever these horrific and harrowing crimes occur, then there's a lot of emotional responses from the public.
Yeah.
But I think in the cold light of day, if the question is asked about whether we should have capital punishment, there are several cases that are unarguable. For example, you just used the term barbaric. If a person decides for some ideological motive that he's going to come to our country and commit a barbaric crime resulting in the death of a person, it's simple. Then the only answer to that is the death penalty.
But for what reason exactly? You know, why do you think? So do you think that's to prevent it happening again? Do you think that is, to save the £3 million that a caller earlier on said it's going to cost for this individual to be in prison for 51 years? I mean, for what reason, what aspect of justice do you think justifies taking someone's life as a criminal?
Well, I don't know. I'm not really aligned to the discussion about the money side of it, the expenses. What I'm aligned to is the fact that people need to be punished. And it's the severity of the crime is so absolutely ultimate as is killing someone, then I think we could actually classify where the death penalty should be applied.
So you think it's punishment to that individual rather than revenge and making us as a society feel better that he has gone?
Well, there's another way to look at it, isn't there? I always remember a very wise person telling me when I was running a company that someone who will tolerate a person in that company who does not carry the company ethics and do the right thing, if he's not corrected or he's not finally finished, then the management of that company has not protected its workers. And we've got to protect our people in the same way. If we are prepared to allow people like this guy to come into the country, he was born here, but other people, you think of the soldier who was decapitated in London, okay?
Well, and that trial started this week, I think, but yes. I'm not sure that the death penalty would have deterred Axel Rudakabana, though.
It's not about deterring. It's not about deterring.
It's punishment. But that's revenge, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, because, look, most people would say that they don't want to see Axel Rudakabana anywhere, whether it be in prison or walking the streets. I get that, but I'm just trying to have a kind of calm, slightly calmer, more detached, rational debate about this, because I think, as you rightly said, we can rush to an emotional conclusion, I suppose, Darren. But I have to say the majority of the calls that I'm seeing here are saying pretty much the same as you. OK, look, we'll carry this on after the break. More guests, more calls. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk, this is Drive, here for another hour.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. I'm in for Peter Cardwell here till 7, then handing over to Kevin O'Sullivan, who I'm sure is going to also have a lot to say in his 3 hours about about today and the sentencing of Axel Rudakabana. just heard, actually, that the Oscar nominations are out, and frankly, who cares? I could not care less about that bunch of preening egotists and sycophants, particularly against a backdrop of what's happening here today in the sentencing of this vile individual. Anyway, so I know there is other news about. We haven't really talked about other news. We had a schedule, by the way, that Ryan dutifully put together today, and frankly, because of your response, actually, on the phones and by way of text, we have had so much response, so much anger, so much opinion, so much vitriol towards this monster that effectively this last 3 hours, 2 hours with an hour to go rather, has been all about Southport, and understandably so. There is still time, an hour, for you to get a call in. I'm sure we won't get to them all, but we'll try and get to as many as we can. 0344 499 1000, or you can do as many people have done and text us on 87222. Right, so I want to know from my next guest, which is Chris Phillips, who's a former Detective Chief Inspector. By the way, we are expecting a statement by Detective Chief Inspector Jason Pye and the Chief Crown Prosecutor Sarah Hammond that were involved in this case, the Rudakabana case. We're expecting them to speak shortly outside of Liverpool Crown Court. So as soon as they do, we will bring you that live, and then obviously we will have comment about what they have to say immediately thereafter. But meantime, let's go to Chris Phillips. So as I say, former Detective Chief Inspector of Met Police. Chris, how are you doing?
Good evening.
Good evening. Sorry to be talking to you about, on such a day, about such a heinous issue and subject. I'm going to ask you a very straight question. How do we stop this happening again, Chris?
Well, it's the most difficult thing. And unfortunately, we've got people in their homes getting themselves into quite a state over what they're viewing on the internet. I'm sure we've seen this before across the world. It's not just a UK problem. And it's a difficult one to solve, because no matter what you do about the knife situation, not being able to buy on Amazon, that's not going to stop anyone from being able to get on a hold of a knife.
It was a pathetic thing to announce.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. I think we should have some controls on that, but it's ineffectual because it won't work. It's a simple fact that anyone can get hold of a knife, anyone can get hold of a vehicle and drive and knock people over. What we've got to try and do is work out a way of what we're going to do with these people that are extreme, whether it's like this without terrorism involved as such, or whether it's people radicalising themselves for Islamic or other terrorism.
But Chris, it's not as if this individual wasn't known to the authorities. I mean, he pretty much had a parking space, didn't he, at the local police station?
Well, he was certainly well known, and this is the big thing. I mean, what's happened to the social services? I think what's happened. He seems to have fallen down the cracks of not being a terrorist, in as much as he's not radicalised and motivated.
Chris,
by
I'm going to have to, sir. Sorry, I'm just going to stop you for a second, because we are now going to go live to Detective Chief Inspector Jason Pye and Chief Crown Prosecutor Sarah Hammond at Merseyside Police HQ.
Firstly, I would like to take this moment to pay tribute to the victims and their families in this harrowing case. They have shown tremendous dignity and composure in the face of unbelievable horror. Many of the cases that we deal with have tragedy, difficulties and trauma, but this is one of the most harrowing that I, as the Chief Crown Prosecutor for this area, have ever come across. On the 29th of July 2024, Axel Rudakabana stabbed and killed 3 young girls at a holiday dance class. He injured 10 other people, 8 of them also young children. Elsie Stankham, BB King and Alice Da Silva Aguirre lost their lives on a day that should have been filled with happiness for them. When Rudakabana entered the room, they were singing and making friendship bracelets. Axel Rudakabana is a murderer, and utter devastation followed as he acted out a meticulously planned rampage of murder and violence. His purpose was to kill, and he targeted the youngest, most vulnerable, no doubt in order to spread the greatest level of fear and outrage, which he did. 3 days ago, he pleaded guilty to all 16 counts against him, meaning the families of the victims did not have to relive the events of that day in a trial. But he has never expressed any remorse only cowardice in his refusal to face the families whose lives he has changed forever. This has been an extremely difficult case for the Crown Prosecution Service and police officers at Merseyside Police. They've had to work through chilling and disturbing footage and evidence, and I would like to thank them for their perseverance, compassion and determination to achieve justice for the victims and their families. This sentencing brings the case to an end, but the events of that day will leave a tragic legacy that will unfortunately endure for many years.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening. I am Detective Chief Inspector Jason Pye, the Senior Investigating Officer for this investigation. Today, Axel Rudiker-Barner has been sentenced for his cowardly and terrifying attack on the young girls at Hearts Base on the 29th of July. Although no outcome at court today could possibly ease the pain and trauma for the victims and their families, I hope that knowing Rudiker-Barner will spend a considerable amount of time in prison will at least bring some comfort. His horrifying attack resulted in the deaths of Bibi, Elsie and Alice, and the thoughts of everyone at Merseyside Police remain with their families. His shocking actions also resulted in serious injuries, both physical and psychological, to the other young girls and adults who will continue to be affected to this day. As the judge has said today, the harm of Rudiker-Barner caused each family and each child and the community has been profound and permanent. The judge added that it is likely that Rudiker-Barner will never be released and will spend the rest of his life in custody. This was the most harrowing, large-scale investigation that our force has ever dealt with, and I wish to praise the commitment, dedication and sheer determination of the investigation team, who have never had to deal with anything like this before. I would like to pass on my thanks to the first responders, who will no doubt still be affected by what they witnessed when they arrived at Hearts Base. I would also like to thank the Crown Prosecution Service, who have worked with us since the beginning of this investigation to ensure justice was done, and Counter-Terrorism, who have provided guidance and expertise throughout. I would also like to thank our family liaison officers, who have supported the families in every which way that they could since the beginning of this investigation. Finally, although Rudiker-Barner has been sentenced to prison today, the pain felt by those families will continue for the rest of their lives, and I want to pay tribute to Bibi, Elsie and Alice. You will never be forgotten. Thank you.
OK, so statements there from, first of all, Chief Crown Prosecutor Sarah Hammond, who of course has headed the process of bringing Axel Rudiker-Barner to justice, and also Detective Chief Inspector Jason Pye, obviously part of the head of the investigation, and from the police perspective. I'm still joined by Chris Phillips. Chris, sorry about that, but obviously an important thing to go to in terms of the statements just made by those two organisations. The police, I think, beyond criticism in this situation, from what Richard Tice was saying earlier on, though, maybe less so the CPS. I mean, Richard Tice wanted to see this labelled as terrorism. Do you think it was terrorism?
Well, there were terrorism offences linked to it. The difficulty is with terrorism. It's quite a simple thing. You know, you can be a murderer without being a terrorist. It's the motive that creates whether it's a terrorist attack or not, and the motive has to be to change society, to influence government, maybe to turn us all into Muslims or whatever. And that clearly wasn't there, and that's why it's not been he's not been charged with terrorism offences. The issue around this ricin, well, maybe we'll never know, but maybe we intended to use that in a different way. And of course, the downloading that handbook, that was all about how to kill people.
Well, so, it was, but that certainly from Richard Tice's point of view, I mean, that many would say, actually, not just Richard Tice, that the fact that he had that in his possession, yes, you can argue that was simply, and I'm using very, very big inverted commas here, that was simply to guide him in terms of how to do what he wanted to do. But the very fact that he had something in his possession, two items, both the ricin and, of course, the manual, that motivated him by way of them being terrorist elements. I mean, many would join the dots and say, well, therefore he was a terrorist. But obviously the definition from what you've articulated that very well in terms of it needs to be based on a religious or kind of racial ideology, means that this didn't meet the test. As I said to Richard, though, does it matter?
Well, I mean, the sentencing is, it's 50-odd years. I mean, I think probably everyone listening to this would never like to see him see the light of day again. And if ever there was a case for the death penalty, this is one. The difficulty is, if you've got a legislation, you've got the terrorism is as it is. You've got to go with that. If you can change the wording of what is terrorism, that's fine.
I mean, do you think? Chris, does it? And sorry, I know I'm interrupting you a little bit, but I'm very mindful of the fact we've got so much to get through here. We've got so much breaking on this, and also multiple phone calls, texts, and so on. But so do forgive me. But I mean, do you think it makes us in some way? I mean, not that we can feel comforted in any way, given the hideousness of this individual's crimes, but is it? He was clearly a murderous psychopath. Is it any consolation, and again I say that with big inverted commas, that this wasn't terrorism, or we don't think it was, or it's not being labelled as such, even though some people would say it is?
Well, I mean, it's clearly not terrorism as per the guide that we've got. The simple fact is that hopefully he never comes out again. We have got to work on this system of what's available to people on the internet to view. The fact is there is extreme violence on there, and we've got to find a way of solving that issue. Not that there are some people that are going to do it anyway.
But Chris, are we suggesting that? Are we suggesting that because you can buy a knife on Amazon and you can watch, murders on the dark web? Are we suggesting that that's what triggers an individual like this? I mean, clearly this individual was warped and murderous and psychopathic anyway. I mean, and frankly, he would have found the knife somewhere in a neighbour's drawer or somewhere, and he certainly perhaps would have, I'm not sure that looking at stuff on the internet makes any difference. I mean, you're either, if you're a murderous psychopath is what I'm saying, you're a murderous psychopath. So I don't think we should get lost down the rabbit hole of, whether it be banning knives from being available on Amazon, or indeed worrying too much about trying to control the World Wide Web, which of course we all know is completely and utterly impossible. What we've got to do is try and make sure that these individuals, when they display such behaviour, which this individual did many, many years ago, that they are neutralised. And what I mean by neutralised is that they're taken out of society. This individual, forget the Amazon thing, forget the internet, he should have been sectioned under the Mental Health Act 3 or 4 years ago, surely.
Now that is something I completely agree with, and yes, we have to find a way and be willing to take people out of society when they are clearly disturbed like this in some way, and sometimes it's because they have terrorist sympathies and they seem to be moving down that route. But we have got so many people in our society that have got these mental issues within them, and we're not dealing with them properly. We're not dealing with them as effectively as we have done in the past.
How do we do that?
And because of that, until we do that, we're going to have these problems pop up.
And I know you're not here as a kind of mental health representative. You're a former detective chief inspector of Metropolitan Police, but the police deal with mental health issues far too often, actually, on the streets of Britain. So how do we deal with that epidemic, that growing issue then? I mean, particularly as we've talked about in the media over the last 2 or 3 days, these lone wolves, and whether they're inspired by ideology and terrorism, or they're just murdering psychopaths. How do we deal with them? How do we flag them? How do we take them out of society much, much earlier so that these things are dealt with before we have another Southport?
In the last 20 years, the police will tell you that they're dealing more and more with people with mental illness. Now, that's oftentimes because the resources have been taken away from local authorities and local mental health units. In my day in policing, there were many mental health hospitals, asylums, you might call them in the old days, and they were full of people that have got these mental health issues, and there was a move to keep them in society, to keep them in the community. Care in the community, you'll remember that, and the care in the community has not been funded either. So you've then got these people that should probably be locked up, aren't being looked after properly in the community, and every now and again you are going to get one that goes off like this.
So a return to the days of asylums?
Well, we certainly need more mental health hospitals and a willingness to actually, for doctors to take people in. And if you speak to any policeman these days, they find it very difficult to deem someone, to take them to section someone, take them to hospital, and they're kept in there until they're treated. Unfortunately, there's a push to keep them out on the streets, and that's simply because of cost.
Well, and Chris, what we don't want is, fluffy liberal social workers patting people like this individual, Axel Rubicana, on the head, and, kind of asking what his problems are, trying to fix them, and so on. What we don't need is a kind of candy floss, cotton wool wrapped, yogurt knitting approach to such individuals. They need to be taken out of society, and that's what we must do. Because surely the lives of children, bearing in mind this individual intended to kill as many as he could. We could be sitting here now talking about the sentencing of this individual for the murder of 12, 13, 14, 15 children. We could be. That was his intent. Surely the lives of those children and children in the future are worth more than a social worker taking a chance on someone like this murderous monster.
Yeah, we've got to be willing to lock people up. It's as simple as that. And often before they've actually committed crimes.
Yes.
And this is a difficult one, it's difficult enough to lock them up after they've committed crimes. But if people are dangerous to society, they need to be out of society and away from children and others.
And Chris, just to reiterate, and again, this is not, we thought he might be dangerous. This is an individual that admitted taking a knife to school on 10 different occasions. It was also said that because he had issues with a particular student at that school, that he took a knife in and would use it if that individual annoyed him. He also rang Childline some time ago and said to the person that answered the phone at Childline, "I don't know what to do, I want to kill someone." Now, if that isn't a flag to the authorities that individual should be taken out of society, I don't know what is.
Well, it's going to be interesting to find out who made the decisions not to lock him up and not to keep him behind bars, because that's
Well, it'll be a load of liberal lawyers and social workers that say, oh, no, you can't possibly do that. He hasn't really done anything wrong, despite taking a knife into school 10 times, having a criminal conviction, and, of course, the other thing, having a zombie knife and a crossbow under his bed. What on earth were the parents doing? Should we get onto that for a second? What are Axel Rudibicana's parents doing, allowing their 17-year-old son to have a zombie knife and a crossbow under his bed in his bedroom?
Yeah, and it is not just him, is it? I mean, let's be quite honest. We have got hundreds upon hundreds of kids running around the streets at the moment with zombie knives and with big knives, machetes and other things.
So do you think we should prosecute the parents, Chris?
We do need proper parenting.
No, but do we need to prosecute? No, do we need to prosecute the parents? So, if the parents know that their son or daughter, generally a son, is a danger, particularly if they're ringing Childline saying they're about to kill someone and they've got weapons in their bedroom, surely it should be a criminal offence for that parent not to tell the police.
Yeah, absolutely. And the big issue, and I've come across this myself over the years, where kids actually rule the roost in a house, particularly when they're being brought up by one person, and they are allowed to roam free. And I mean, this is a much bigger issue. Let's be quite honest. We do have gangs in our cities, and many kids are carrying knives in order to protect themselves from the gangs that they think. This is a much bigger issue, but we do have to get back to proper parenting. We do have to make sure that our kids aren't roaming around the streets with knives, and take responsibility for your own kids if they are, but indeed, also empower and support the police to deal with these bloody kids when they've got knives, and allow stop and search to go on to
rather than making excuses for little Johnny or whoever. Indeed. Right, Chris Phillips, thank you very much indeed. Assertive and wise words. We're going to be back after this with some more calls, of which there are many. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk.
It's obviously a very horrid situation for everybody. There is some disquiet, is there not, at the very least, about the way that the authorities have handled all of this.
At the moment, I think people here are just in that panicked fight or flight mode. It really is. You're in the lap of the gods. Everybody's on edge. Nobody feels safe.
As you know, where I live is on fire right now. Literally, the entire city of the Pacific Palisades is burning.
Any message from you to Governor Newsom or Karen Bass tonight?
Spend less on hair gel. What can I say to them? Not big admirer of either.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back, Russell Quirk. This is Drive. I'm here till 7, then handing over to Kevin O'Sullivan. Let's go straight to the phones. Thank you very much indeed for your calls. Kind of unsurprising, really. So, yes, emotions running high, understandably. And let's see if they are with Zoe from Staffordshire. Zoe.
Oh, hello, Russell. Thank you for taking the call.
Pleasure.
I just want to say a couple of quick points. I'm absolutely apoplectic hearing the mealy-mouthed, off-the-peg platitudes from Keir Starmer just now.
By way of his statement that we read out just now.
Yeah, he's been in hiding all day. He knew all of this information at the time. You remember, what was it, a couple of days after the actual incident, and he went down to the scene and laid his little flowers. He didn't even have the courtesy or the respect to even speak to the community.
Well, he was there, Zoe, for precisely 19 seconds.
Yeah. And I just want to say I want to agree with alacrity about the points you've been sort of aiming towards today, particularly with political opportunism that's going to come out of this.
Do you think we're going to see that?
Well, you were already seeing it. What's Kemi Badenoch just said?
Why don't you tell me? I don't know. Tell me.
She's just made a statement that we need to look into the sentencing tariffs.
All right, as we expected. So there will now be a competition amongst most parties to see who can trump the other in terms of asking for more and more severe sentencing guidelines. Yes, that's going to happen. But that doesn't really fix anything, does it?
Really annoying is that Keir Starmer knew all of the details of this horrific and this vile creature's actions. And let's just say this person is a symptom of the utterly broken justice system that we have in place. He is a symptom of it. But he could have, in the last few months, instead of going on his little aren't I important hollybobs all around the world, he could have put legislation in place in time for this that would have meant that a whole life or full life tariff could have been applied.
Yeah, I mean, you probably got the advantage on me there, Zoe, in terms of whether you can do that after the offence. And I've got no idea. I'm not a lawyer, but look, feelings are running high. Look, he's got 51 years, and I suppose, look, in the cold light of day, 51 years, he may well never come out. I mean, he could do technically, so whether, I guess, it was what we all wanted to see really, which was an unequivocal whole of life tariff where he would not come out. I guess, whether he is a terrorist or a murdering psychopath, one or both of those, at least we're in a position now where he is incarcerated. We've talked about, and are not encouraging, by the way, the fact that someone of his, of his record, given the crime, will not have a particularly easy time in prison. But what else do you think should happen? And what do you think we should do to try and, I mean, genuinely, rather than the hand-wringing from politicians, as you rightly say, rather than the opportunism, which we're now going to see over the next 2 or 3 days, or we need to add this, we need to tighten up on that. What do we need to do to prevent this? Question one, Zoe. Question two is, do you get the sense, as I discussed with Richard Tice MP just now, that there is an ethnicity divide, that there is political correctness going on, not just when it comes to what we saw in the summer, the riots and how different people are dealt with based on who they are from a demographic point of view. Do you think that this individual has slipped through the net because the police, the Crown Prosecution Service and so on, a bit like the grooming gangs, the rape gangs, the Pakistani, largely Pakistani rape gangs, do you think that the same philosophy has been applied to him so as not to cause so-called racial tension within certain communities? Do you think that's happened here?
Yeah, it's as plain as the nose on your face. It's as plain as the nose on your face. That's why the grooming, rape gangs, that's how they've been allowed to get to the point that they have. And with regard to what needs to be done, I'd just refer back to sort of what I mentioned just now. This guy has slipped through the net because the whole justice system, which is run by politicians, civil servants, bedwetters, liberal lefties, it's in an absolute shambles.
The liberal elite, Zoe, you're right. I'm going to have to move on. Zoe from Staffordshire, thank you very much indeed for your call. Let's quickly go to Daniel in Epsom. Daniel, what did you want to say?
All right, Russ. I'll tell you what the elephant in the room is, right? The elephant in the room is that we've had mass immigration for far too long into Britain.
But he was born here.
But his mum and dad should have been here. We've been telling successive governments for 20, 30 years that we don't want immigration from the third world. Only choose the brightest and the best to come here. Is his dad a brain surgeon or something? And I'll tell you what, Russ.
But not all, I mean, look, I hear you, but not all serial killers are second-generation or first-generation immigrants.
Russell, have a guess where they're not having lone wolf attacks and little girls stabbed and killed and maimed. Have a guess where that's not happening.
Hungary, Poland, Slovakia.
Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia. Do you know why?
I do. Tell us.
Yeah, because they've got a homogenous population and they haven't had mass uncontrolled immigration from the Islamic third world or the third world.
But Daniel, but we're not suggesting there is no crime in those countries and that all crime is caused by immigrants, are we?
Well, not all crime is good. We've always had wrongs of our own in this country, but look at the crimes that we've imported. FGM, honour killing, sham marriage, suicide bombing, the full vow, lone wolf attacks, grooming gangs. We've got groups of black gangs up in our towns and cities up and down the country.
But it seems to me, and look, we can debate the merits or otherwise what you've just said in terms of what you're effectively saying is that the country has suffered because of immigration and the propensity for immigrants to cause more crime. That's what you're saying, and I don't have the data in front of me to either support that or contend against that. I think what is clear with this case and many, many others, particularly around the riots that happened as a consequence of this incident in Southport, that there is undoubtedly, unequivocally, a two-tier approach to policing and to justice. That is as much of a problem because, of course, if police and the justice system were actually applying police and justice to individuals on an even-handed basis, then we wouldn't have the problem, would we?
Well, we wouldn't have the problem if we haven't, in the 90s, we put a quarter on our population. We wouldn't have the problem if we didn't allow it in the first place. And I tell you what, there's a major change coming in this country because the majority of Britons have had enough. I'm sick of the decline and degradation. Every day there was a stabbing in Asda's near me today. This has got to stop. Something big's going to happen, and I'm sick to death of seeing it every day in the paper. The decline and degradation are linked wholesale with mass immigration from the third world, and anybody who can't see it is blind to it.
OK, that's Daniel in Epsom. Do you agree with him? 03444 499 1000 or text 87222 in the word talk. I'm going to take a break, and then we've got about half an hour to go to the end. It's flown by, hasn't it? But again, for all the wrong reasons. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk and Drive.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm here till 7, then handing over to Kevin O'Sullivan. We're going to talk to Ben Harris-Quinney now, chairman of the Bow Group, which is a think tank, a man with an opinion, I'm sure. Ben, welcome to Talk.
Thank you.
Let me just read you some of the texts that I've been getting. We've obviously, in the wake of the sentencing today, we're obviously getting a lot of opinion, a lot of emotion about the incident, the crime itself, of course, which obviously was a few months ago now. Let me just read you some of these. So we have, there's no name on this, unfortunately, but never mind. It says, I think it's ridiculous that he was given 52 years. Life is life. Those 3 poor innocent girls have had their lives taken and he's still breathing. Hanging must be brought back. Ben says that my view, it means me, on the death penalty isn't quite fitting into our society now because society is barbaric and barbaric individuals live amongst us. These people don't deserve to live the rest of their lives. They choose that path, so they must now be dealt with in such a manner. And Joanna says 52 years doesn't seem long enough. Hopefully the years in between parole boards will have better developed with a better selection as we learn by their mistakes, and so on and so on. So a great sense of feeling here of 52 years even not being enough. And that takes us to the question that I've raised 2 or 3 times on this show, that the death penalty, capital punishment, presumably is back on the agenda. Do you agree with it? Do you think that should be reintroduced, Ben?
Well, personally, I'm not in favour of capital punishment, but I think a lot of polls suggest the majority of the country are.
If people were polled tomorrow, the majority would be.
Right, and I think it should certainly be part of the conversation. What I believe in is a system where we send people like this to prison for life, but also the prisons are worse than a worse fate than death. So I certainly don't think that this individual should be housed in any kind of prison with television, with Sky, with entertainment of any kind. I think they should be put in a cell and they should spend the rest of their lives reflecting on what they've done. But there is obviously also a wider problem here, which is why are these sorts of crimes occurring, and what can we do to prevent them? Because this horrific crime has already occurred, and the individual should obviously be punished to the maximum extent of the law. And as a lot of the people that have written in said, hopefully that law will get stronger. The laws that can be used will get stronger, and parole hearings won't allow him to come out.
But that doesn't stop. That doesn't stop people like this committing the acts that they have committed. And look.
So what I think does that is reflecting on what the public are really angry about, and it's only really channels like Talk that even allow this to be discussed. But what we've seen in those texts, we've heard from your last caller, is a very clear sense of anger that these people should not have been in the country in the first place. And whilst you can have whatever view you want on that, but that is a very, very significant reason for the outpouring of public anger, and it should be discussed and it should be debated.
Well, it should be, but it would have potentially, obviously, if his parents hadn't come over from Rwanda, where, by the way, there was a genocide, we need to potentially, there's some dots to be joined there, by the way, it wouldn't have prevented, for instance, the murder of Joe Cox.
No, of course it's not going to prevent all murders, but I think a lot of people are looking at these situations and thinking, a lot of migrants coming to the country are fueling certain types of crime waves. Knife crime in London is often used as an example. Recent studies show that migrants are more likely to commit crimes. And obviously you don't want to, these are general figures, so you don't want to tar all migrants with the same brush. But if you have a system that is letting 1.5 million people into the country a year, and then illegal immigration on top of that, you've got nothing like the kind of sieve you need to have to make sure the right people are coming in. And I think that's why the British public are so angry about these cases. Obviously, it's a tragedy. It would be a tragedy if someone who had lived in this country and their parentage goes back 10 generations had committed it. But the fact that this occurred in the way it did, that there was this very much sense of two-tier policing in terms of attempting to prevent it from happening, and then two-tier policing in terms of after it happened and what happened to a lot of the people that were saying things on social media that might not have been 100% accurate, but actually in terms of the spirit of what they're saying, which was the anger that there has been such high mass immigration without any democratic mandate, and it has led to crimes such as these and other terrorist attacks that have occurred, obviously, over the past 2 to 3 decades. That's where the public anger is coming from. And I think until we get politicians that are grown up enough to address that and discuss that that is a key reason, as you mentioned, doesn't happen in Poland, doesn't happen in Hungary, doesn't happen in Slovakia, doesn't tend to happen in places like Japan. Until we can have a mature conversation about that, I think not only are these things going to keep happening, we're not going to be able to prevent them, and we're not going to be able to hold ourselves together as a country when things fall apart and anger rises as a result.
Yeah, and I think most would agree also that the most sinister aspect of this immigration, and indeed, although there doesn't seem to be much in the way of data in the UK with regard to crime committed by those that were not born here, so immigrant crime, there is certainly some data in Denmark, and there's certainly some data that relates to France, which I saw, that showed recently that 70% of those that were convicted of rape in Paris were not, as in the assailants, were not born in France. Denmark actually has almost a league table of those migrants that have gone to their country and committed crime, and there is a percentage of likelihood that applies a bit like this. Those, for instance, from certain countries, whether it be Kenya, whether it be Somalia or others, are more likely to commit crime per capita than the natural population. So I think across Europe, here and there is some data. There isn't enough data in Britain, though. Do you think that is purposeful? Do you think the reason that this government in particular won't want to publish crime by ethnicity, as the likes of Rupert Lowe are trying to bring about, do you think that's because they suspect that there is a problem there and that immigration is linked to crime and vice versa?
Well, we did have quite a lot of data that came out recently specifically on the issue of sex-based crime, obviously linked to what has occurred with the Grooming gang scandal. But yes, that doesn't cover all aspects of crime, and we don't tend to track that in detail. Well, I certainly think we should, but the government is moving in the opposite direction. They are tracking less aspects of immigration and the demographic changes that occur as a result of immigration and crime than they used to be. So I would say that's clear evidence of an attempt, as is...
With another cover-up, Ben, isn't it?
Well, as is what's gone on with the Grooming gang scandal. It's clearly a recognition, at least in private, by senior politicians, that we can't talk about some of the real root causes for this in case, we cause an unacceptable public debate. But that demonstrates that debate needs to be had, because anything that's kept under wraps for too long will obviously blow up in the ways that it has been doing over the last few years in Britain. So you mentioned Rupert Lowe. There are a few politicians, but there are seldom few in Parliament that are having this conversation. You walk into a pub up and down the land, you listen to your callers, the people texting in, they're all talking about this.
It's unanimous. So the view is unanimous, and yet when the likes of Rupert Lowe or Nigel Farage or Lee Anderson stand up in the House of Commons and talk about, for instance, the need for an inquiry into the grooming gangs, you hear kind of tuts and heckling from the Labour benches. What are they trying to hide?
Indeed, look, I mean, you can have different views on the matter. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why we have supposedly freedom of speech and debate, although certain people tweet the wrong thing. They seem to disappear as a result. But basically, if you have a debate in Parliament over these issues, people can make different points. But the fact that we haven't even got to the point where we can have a debate, where we can actually say, well, look, a lot of people in this country feel that and undemocratic, because no one ever voted for mass immigration, our undemocratic mass immigration policies are leading to a lot of these crimes like what we saw in Southall. We can then look at the truth of that and look at some of the figures and try and track more figures as we go forward to support or disprove that argument, but also have a general debate about, whether we think the mass immigration over the last 30 years that we never voted for has been a good thing or a bad thing for the country.
Well, and presumably one of the most alarming aspects of that is, quite apart from the fact that we have about 1 million people coming to this country a year, net migration of about 750,000, although the ONS seem to revise that on a frequent basis, so it could be 900,000, it could be, who knows? We don't actually really know how many people are coming here, it seems, even though we actually have an Office of National Statistics. But the biggest issue, surely, is the 40,000 or so undocumented so-called asylum seekers that come here anonymously. I mean, not only do we not know who they are, we seem to lose most of them into communities. That is the most worrying aspect of what you're talking about, isn't it, surely? The fact that they're coming here, mostly men, it's not kids, it's not women, and we don't even know who they are or what their record is or what they've been up to in the countries that they come from.
Indeed, and there will be huge numbers of people coming to this country that no one ever tracks, no one ever finds. When we talk about the asylum figures and how many people have come over in small boats, what we're talking about is the people that were tracked and caught doing so.
Are they not tagged, Ben? I mean, why are they not all tagged?
Detection.
Why are they not tagged?
Well, indeed, and why are they, put up in 4- or 5-star hotels with no real...
Well, is it because the liberal elite would say, well, you can't tag them because they're not criminals? I mean, technically they are. They've come here illegally. I mean, although the Labour government unwound it, the Conservatives made coming here on a small boat illegal.
There obviously is a view that says there's no such thing as an illegal migrant. Everyone that comes here is legal. To those people, I'd say, try going to the airport next time without a passport and see how you get on. But in a general sense, as you rightly say, we've got a huge number of people coming into the country, that we know are coming into the country, that we don't know what their previous track record is. We've got people on top of that we don't know that are coming into the country, but are obviously coming in lorries, in boats, and all sorts of methods. And Lee Anderson, there's a clip doing the rounds of him questioning, I think, the Albanian ambassador in Parliament, and saying, why do we think that these people that are claiming asylum want to discard their passport? Why don't they just come in on a cheap flight? Why are they going
I've said it a million times, Ryanair, and claim asylum at passport control at Stansted. I've got to go to a break, but just a very, very quick question. Do you think that the Trump effect, given what he's done in 3 days in terms of the protection of the United States borders, do you think that will rub off here?
Well, I think it's quite extraordinary that since Trump's come in and throughout the whole campaign, our debate has really been their debate. And this was the case with the Grooming gang scandal. The fact that it became a debate in the US fired the debate in the UK, which I think was a positive thing because it shed more light on it. So I think what Trump is doing will unquestionably make this more of a debate in Europe, make it more of a debate.
So I suspect he's doing something about it immediately. We've had a government that's been in for 6 months and done absolutely precisely nothing. It only took Donald Trump 6 hours.
You might say we've had a government for 30 years that has done the opposite.
The uni government, absolutely. I couldn't disagree with you, Ben. Ben Harris-Quinney, chairman of the Bow Group, thank you very much indeed. Until next time, we're going to go to a break and then some calls up to 7 o'clock, and then let's see what Kevin O'Sullivan has to say about today's proceedings.
It's obviously a very horrid situation for everybody. There is some disquiet, is there not, at the very least, about the way that the authorities have handled all of this.
At the moment, I think people here are just in that panicked fight or flight mode. It really is. You're in the lap of the gods. Everybody's on edge. Nobody feels safe.
As you know, where I live is on fire right now. Literally, the entire city of the Pacific Palisades is burning.
Any message from you to Governor Newsom or Karen Bass tonight?
Spend less on hair gel. What can I say to them? Not big admirer of either.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Drive. This is Talk, the home of free speech, and that's absolutely been the case today, not just on this show, but every show. I think today it's fair to say in talking about this this subject, the hideous episode culminating today in the sentencing of Axel Rudiker-Garner. It's yes, horrendous stuff, and I have to say, tribute to all presenters on Talk today and producers that yes, somehow we've managed to deliver the news without cracking up too much, because we're all human beings and most of us are parents, and frankly this is not easy stuff to do and to talk about. Talking of talking, Peter from Hartlepool.
Hello.
Hello. What did you want to say, Peter? Welcome.
Yeah, I just want to talk about the I think the word barbaric is being used with regard to the death penalty. I listened to the sentencing today with the judge.
I used it. I said barbaric.
Yourself, and I listened to the sentence there with the judge, and he what he described, obviously it went mute and we couldn't listen to it. It was really upsetting. That's terrible, and I was quite upset myself. So when you talk about the death penalty and we talk about we think that our country's not barbaric, in my mind it is barbaric because of the people that we've imported into this country, because they're essentially third world and they're barbaric. So whether we talk about the children of the people we've imported who haven't integrated in our society or not, the fact is that they can be, and a lot of them are barbaric. Or if you look at knife crimes in London, essentially when you lower the living standards of people and one group of people carry around knives, you'll find that another young group of people will carry around knives. And what happens is people die and people get killed.
But it's not just, I mean, you're talking about ethnic minorities, those that come here and are first, second, third generation immigrants. We're not suggesting that they're the only ones that carry knives, are we?
No, not at all. But when you lower living standards due to the fact that we've got too many people in our country, too many people in our capital city, we haven't got health. Our health system's not working, and we essentially haven't got as much as what we've had in the past. Go back to the 90s before Tony Blair brought people in 97, and we brought millions of people in over a very short period of time. And I can see the difference. I'm 46-year-old now, and I can see the difference from when I was 20 to what it is now. And the living standards have gone down. What that creates is it just creates worse living standards, and essentially, when kids haven't got anything to go and do, when you've got people who come into this country who are used to pulling knives, and you essentially get a lot of people, whether they're from this country or not, carrying knives, because that's what you do and that's how you protect yourself.
So what has happened to immigration in this country then? Because we are a nation of immigrants. I mean, whether you come from the Normans or the Vikings or whatever, or you came over from the West Indies in the 1960s, or you came over from Ireland in the 1970s, or from India in the 1970s and 80s, we are a nation that is built on immigration. What has gone wrong, and where did it go wrong, Peter? Because we didn't have an Indian demographic or an Irish demographic on the streets of London and other major cities in Britain in the 60s and 70s causing trouble with knives. I mean, just to kind of focus on your point that you think it's predominantly just an ethnic minority issue. I know you're not quite saying that, but that's kind of your inference. What's gone wrong in terms of what immigration is now?
So if you look at past immigration, I think the numbers, and I don't know what the numbers are at the top of my head, but since 1997 and Tony Blair essentially started it, Angela Merkel, I think she said something in 2015, if you look at Germany, what's going on in Germany, the literal numbers of people coming into our society.
Peter, can I venture, can I tell you what the problem is? I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical question, really. The difference is that up until 1997, we were selective. We decided who came here on merit. So we decided that we wanted people that either had a qualification, they had experience in a particular business, or they had money, they were entrepreneurs. From 1997 onwards, whether it was Europe or worldwide, we opened the floodgates. And we have not been selective. We have not chosen who comes here for the good of the country. And then, in a reaction to some of the problems that have been caused by that lack of integration, that lack of multiculturalism, we now roll forward 20 or 30 years to now, because we're worried about being called racist, we won't bring certain people to task from certain minorities. That's exactly why we are where we are. Do you agree?
Absolutely. So if you look back, I think it was in the late 70s or early 80s, I don't know what year it was, Enoch Powell mentioned all this, and then he probably should have been Prime Minister because he actually spoke about it even at that time. He didn't get into the Prime Minister slot. Yeah. And even then it was a problem.
Peter, I'm going to move on if you don't mind. We've had so many calls. I really value your call. Thank you. It's been great to talk to you, but I've got another one I want to go to now. Scott, in my home county of Essex. Scott, where in Essex are you?
Somewhere just outside of Romford.
Somewhere just outside of Romford. That's because you live somewhere posh like Stapleford Abbots, don't you?
It's not posh, no way posh.
What did you want to say, Scott?
With this issue about we're supposed to be a civilised society, therefore we cannot bring back corporal punishment.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're not buying it?
Well, this is the problem. If you go down that route, then people will end up sort of having corporal punishment for stealing a loaf of bread. So you can't really go down that route without...
Well, it's not done Saudi Arabia any harm, has it? I mean, their crime rate's a little bit lower than ours because they cut your hands off if you nick a loaf of bread.
Yeah, well, this person nicked something that's slightly more precious than a loaf of bread.
3 young lives.
Potential lives.
100%.
Well, how about we give him an option? He goes into solitary confinement, and on a table there is a knife, a bottle of poison, and a rope. He can do what he wants. It's his human right to choose. And as we have a policy in this country to give inmates the right to change sex, how about we give him a first-class ticket to Veritas?
Well, Scott, I hear you, and I see you're being innovative there in terms of righting the wrongs of our woeful criminal justice system, although I think, frankly, Judge Goose did do right by the criminal justice system in the sentencing today. I wouldn't give Axel Rudibicana any choice in anything whatsoever. I do actually want to know why he changed his plea very, very suddenly at the beginning of this week to guilty. I do hope it was not because he was offered something in the way of a deal in terms of his treatment in prison. I hope that wasn't the reason that he changed his plea, because he was persuaded that otherwise he might be in worse conditions. As a caller said earlier on, Scott, the conditions for him in prison and others of his kind should be the worst possible, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it's a part of prison and the punishment system is you're removed from society, so you're no longer a problem or a danger to society. You are punished for the crime that you have committed and the attempt to rehabilitation. At the moment, removal from danger isn't happening because they're out in the streets literally in a couple of days, and rehabilitation is not happening at all.
Yeah, Scott, I've got to go because I've got a minute left, and I just want to read a very, very quick statement by Kemi Badenoch. Scott in Essex, thank you very much, in a posh part of Essex by the sounds of it. Kemi Badenoch quickly says, while the government inquiry